Chapter 1. The Letter. Towards the middle of the month of May, in the year 1660, at 9 o'clock in the morning, when the sun, already high in the heavens, was fast absorbing the dew from the ramparts of the castle of Blois, a little cavalcade, composed of 3 men and 2 pages, re-entered the city by the bridge, without producing any other effect upon the passengers of a quay beyond a first movement of the hand to the head, as a salute, and a second movement of the tongue to express, in the purest French then, spoken in France, "There is Monsieur returning from hunting." And that was all, whilst, however, the horses were climbing the steep acclivity which lead from the river to the castle. Several shop boys approached the last horse, from whose saddlebow a number of birds were suspended by the beak. On seeing this, the inquisitive youths manifested with rustic freedom their contempt for such paltry sport, and, after a dissertation among themselves upon the disadvantages of hawking, they returned to their occupations. One only of the curious party, a stout, stubby, cheerful lad, having demanded how it was that Monsieur, who, from his great revenues, had it in his power to amuse himself so much better, could be satisfied with such mean diversions. "Do you not know," one of the standers-by replied, "that Monsieur's principal amusement is to weary himself?" The light-hearted boy shrugged his shoulders with a gesture which said as clear as day, "In that case, I would rather be plain Jack than a prince." And all resumed their labors. In the meanwhile, Monsieur continued his route with an air at once so melancholy and so majestic that he certainly would have attracted the attention of spectators, if spectators there had been. But the good citizens of Blois could not pardon Monsieur for having chosen their gay city for an abode in which to indulge melancholy disease, and as often as they caught a glimpse of the illustrious ennui, they stole away gaping, or drew back their heads into the interior of their dwellings, to escape the soporific influence of that long pale face, of those watery eyes, and that languid address, so that the worthy prince was almost certain to find the streets deserted whenever he chanced to pass through them. Now, on the part of the citizens of Blois, this was a culpable piece of disrespect, for Monsieur was, after the king, nay, even, perhaps before the king, the greatest noble of the kingdom. In fact, God, who had granted to Louis XIV, then reigning, the honor of being son of Louis XIII, had granted to Monsieur the honor of being son of Henry IV. It was not then, or at least it ought not to have been, a trifling source of pride for the city of Blois, that Gaston of Orleans had chosen it as his residence, and he is caught in the ancient castle of its states. But it was the destiny of this great prince to excite the attention and admiration of the public, in a very modified degree wherever he might be. Monsieur had fallen into the situation by habit. It was not, perhaps, this which gave him that air of listlessness. Monsieur had been tolerably busy in the course of his life. A man cannot allow the heads of a dozen of his best friends to be cut off without feeling a little excitement, and as, since the accession of Mazarin to power, no heads had been cut off, Monsieur's occupation was gone, and his morale suffered from it. The life of the poor prince was, then, very dull. After his little morning hawking party on the banks of the Bouvian or in the woods of Chivigny, Monsieur crossed the Loire, went to breakfast at Chambord, with or without an appetite, and the city of Blois heard no more of its sovereign lord and master till the next hawking day. So much for the ennui extra-morose. Of the ennui of the interior, we will give the reader an idea if he will with us follow the cavalcade to the majestic porch of the Castle of the States. Monsieur rode a little steady-paced horse, equipped with a large saddle of red Flemish velvet, with stirrups in the shape of buskins. The horse was of bay color. Monsieur's pourpoint of crimson velvet corresponded with a cloak of the same shade in the horse's equipment, and it was only by this red appearance of the whole that the prince could be known from his 2 companions, the one dressed in violet, the other in green. He on the left, in violet, was his equerry. He on the right, in green, was a grand veneur. One of the pages carried 2 gerfalcons upon a perch, the other a hunting horn, which he blew with a careless note at 20 paces from the castle. Everyone about this listless prince did what he had to do listlessly. At the signal, 8 guards, who were lounging in the sun in the square court, ran to their halberts, and Monsieur made his solemn entry into the castle. When he had disappeared under the shades of the porch, 3 or 4 idlers, who had followed the cavalcade to the castle after pointing out the suspended birds to each other, dispersed with comments upon what they saw, and, when they were gone, the street, the place, and the court all remained deserted alike. Monsieur dismounted without speaking a word, went straight to his apartments, where his valet changed his dress, and as Madame had not yet sent orders respecting breakfast, Monsieur stretched himself upon a chaise longue, and was soon as fast asleep as if it had been 11 o'clock at night. The 8 guards, who concluded their service of the day was over, laid themselves down very comfortably in the sun upon some stone benches. The grooms disappeared with their horses into the stables, and, with the exception of a few joyous birds, startling each other with their sharp chirping in the tufted shrubberies, it might have been thought that the whole castle was as soundly asleep as Monsieur was. All at once, in the midst of this delicious silence, there resounded a clear ringing laugh, which caused several of the halberdiers in the enjoyment of their siesta to open at least one eye. This burst of laughter proceeded from a window of the castle, visited at this moment by the sun, that embraced it in one of those large angles which the profiles of the chimneys mark out upon the walls before midday. The little balcony of wrought iron which advanced in front of this window was furnished with a pot of red gilliflowers, another pot of primroses, and an early rose tree, the foliage of which, beautifully green, was variegated with numerous red specks announcing future roses. In the chamber lighted by this window was a square table, covered with an old large-flowered Harlem tapestry. In the center of this table was a long-necked stone bottle, in which were irises and lilies of the valley. At each end of this table was a young girl. The position of these 2 young people was singular. They might have been taken for 2 boarders escaped from a convent. One of them, with both elbows on the table and a pen in her hand, was tracing characters upon a sheet of fine Dutch paper. The other, kneeling upon a chair, which allowed her to advance her head and bust over the back of it to the middle of the table, was watching her companion as she wrote, or rather hesitated to write. Thence 1,000 cries, the 1,000 railleries, the 1,000 laughs, one of which, more brilliant than the rest, had startled the birds in the gardens and disturbed the slumbers of Monsieur's guards. We are taking portraits now. We shall be allowed, therefore, we hope, to sketch the 2 last of this chapter. The one who was leaning in the chair, that is to say, the joyous, the laughing one, was a beautiful girl from 18 to 20, with brown complexion and brown hair, splendid, from eyes which sparkled beneath strongly marked brows, and particularly from her teeth, which seemed to shine like pearls between her red coral lips. Her every movement seemed the accent of a sunny nature. She did not walk, she bounded. The other, she who was writing, looked at her turbulent companion with an eye as limpid, as pure, and as blue as the azure of the day. Her hair, of a shaded fairness, arranged with exquisite taste, fell in silky curls over her lovely mantling cheeks. She passed across the paper a delicate hand, whose thinness announced her extreme youth. At each burst of laughter that proceeded from a friend, she raised, as if annoyed, her white shoulders in a poetical and mild manner, but they were wanting in that richfulness of mold which was likewise to be wished in her arms and hands. "Montalais, Montalais," said she at length, in a voice soft and caressing as a melody, "you laugh too loud. You laugh like a man. You will not only draw the attention of Messrs. the guards, but you will not hear Madame's bell when Madame rings." This admonition neither made the young girl called Montalais cease to laugh and gesticulate. She only replied, "Louise, you do not speak as you think, my dear. You know that Messrs. the guards, as you call them, have only just commenced their sleep, and that a cannon would not waken them. You know that Madame's bell could be heard at the bridge of Blois, and that consequently I shall hear it when my services are required by Madame. What annoys you, my child, is that I laugh while you are writing, and what you are afraid of is that Madame de Saint Remy, your mother, should come up here, as she does sometimes when we laugh too loud, that she should surprise us, and that she should see that enormous sheet of paper upon which, in a quarter of an hour, you have only traced the words Monsieur Raoul. Now, you are right, my dear Louise, because after these words, Monsieur Raoul, others may be put so significant and so incendiary as to cause Madame de Saint Remy to burst out into fire and flames. Hein, is not that true now? Say." And Montalais redoubled her laughter and noisy provocations. The fair girl at length became quite angry. She tore the sheet of paper on which, in fact, the words Monsieur Rowe were written in good characters, and crushing the paper in her trembling hands, she threw it out of the window. There, said Mademoiselle de Montalais. There's our little lamb, our gentle dove, angry. Don't be afraid, Louise. Madame de Saint Remy will not come, and if she should, you know I have a quick ear. Besides, what can be more permissible than a write to an old friend of 12 years' standing, particularly when the letter begins with the words Monsieur Raoul? It is all very well. I will not write to him at all, said the young girl. Ah. In good sooth, Montalais is properly punished, cried the jeering brunette, still laughing. Come, let us try another sheet of paper, and finish our dispatch offhand. Good. There's the bell ringing now. By my faith, so much the worse. Madam must wait, or else do without a first maid of honor this morning. A bell, in fact, did ring. It announced that Madame had finished her toilette and waited for Monsieur to give her his hand and conduct her from the salon to the refectory. This formality being accomplished with great ceremony, the husband and wife breakfasted, and then separated till the hour of dinner, invariably fixed at 2 o'clock. The sound of this bell caused a door to be opened in the offices on the left hand of the court, from which filed 2 maitres d'hotel followed by 8 scullions bearing a kind of hand-barrow loaded with dishes under silver covers. One of the maitres d'hotel, the first in rank, touched one of the guards, who was snoring on his bench, slightly with his wand. He even carried his kindness so far as to place the halberd which stood against the wall in the hands of the man stupid with sleep, after which the soldier, without explanation, escorted the vianday of Monsieur to the refectory, preceded by a page and the 2 maitres d'hotel. Wherever the vianday passed, the soldiers ported arms. Mademoiselle de Montalais and her companion had watched from their window the details of the ceremony, to which, by the by, they must have been pretty well accustomed, but they did not look so much from curiosity as to be assured they should not be disturbed. So guards, scullions, maitres d'hotel, and pages having passed, they resumed their places at the table, and the sun, which, through the window frame, had for an instant fallen upon those 2 charming countenances, now only shed its light upon the gilliflowers, primroses, and rose-tree. Bah! Said Mademoiselle de Montalais, taking her place again. Madame will breakfast very well without me. Oh, Montalais, you will be punished, replied the other girl, sitting down quietly in hers. Punished, indeed, that is to say, deprived of a ride. That is just the way in which I wish to be punished. To go out in the grand coach, perch upon a doorstep, to turn to the left, twist round to the right, over roads full of ruts, where we cannot exceed a league in 2 hours, and then to come back straight towards a wing of the castle in which is the window of Mary de Medici, so that Madame never fails to say, could one believe it possible that Mary de Medici should have escaped from that window, 47 feet high? The mother of 2 princes and 3 princesses. If you call that relaxation, Louise, all I ask is to be punished every day, particularly when my punishment is to remain with you and write such interesting letters as we write. Montalais, there are duties to be performed. You talk of them very much at your ease, dear child, you, who are left quite free amidst this tedious court. You are the only person that reaps the advantages of them without incurring the trouble. You, who are really more one of Madame's maids of honor than I am, because Madame makes her affection for your father-in-law glance off upon you, so that you enter this dull house as the birds fly into yonder court, inhaling the air, pecking the flowers, picking up the grain, without having the least service to perform or the least annoyance to undergo. And you talk to me of duties to be performed. In sooth, my pretty idler, what are your own proper duties, unless to write to the handsome Raoul? And even that you don't do, so that it looks to me as if you likewise were rather negligent of your duties. Louise assumed a serious air, leaned her chin upon her hand, and, in a tone full of candid remonstrance, "And do you reproach me with my good fortune?" said she. "Can you have the heart to do it? You have a future. You belong to the court. The king, if he should marry, will require Monsieur to be near his person. You will see splendid fetes. You will see the king, who they say is so handsome, so agreeable. And still more, I shall see Raoul, who attends upon another prince, added Montalais maliciously. Poor Raoul, sighed Louise. Now is the time to write to him, my pretty dear. Come, begin again, with that famous Monsieur Raoul which figures at the top of the poor torn sheet. She then held the pen toward her, and with a charming smile encouraged her hand, which quickly traced the word she named. What next? Asked the younger of the two girls. Why, now write what you think, Louise, replied Montalais. Are you quite sure I think of anything? You think of somebody, and that amounts to the same thing, or rather even more. Do you think so, Montalais? Louise, your blue eyes are as deep as the sea I saw at Boulogne last year. No, I mistake. The sea is perfidious. Your eyes are as deep as the azure yonder. Look, over our heads. Well, since you can read so well in my eyes, tell me what I'm thinking about, Montalais. In the first place, you don't think Monsieur Raoul. You think my dear Raoul. Oh, never blush for such a trifle as that. My dear Raoul, we will say, you implore me to write to you at Paris, where you are detained by your attendants on M. le Prince. As you must be very dull there, to seek for amusement in the remembrance of a provinciale. Louise rose up suddenly. No, Montalais, said she, with a smile, I don't think a word of that. Look, this is what I think. And she seized a pen boldly and traced, with a firm hand, the following words. I should have been very unhappy if your entreaties to obtain a remembrance of me had been less warm. Everything here reminds me of our early days, which so quickly pass away, which so delightfully flew by, that no others will ever replace the charm of them in my heart. Montalais, who watched the flying pen, and read, the wrong way upwards, as fast as a friend wrote, he interrupted by clapping her hands. Capital, cried she. There's frankness, there's heart, there's style. Show these Parisians, my dear, that Blois is a city for fine language. He knows very well that Blois was a paradise to me, replied the girl. That is exactly what you mean to say, and you speak like an angel. I will finish, Montalais. And she continued as follows. You often think of me, you say, Monsieur Raoul, I thank you, but that does not surprise me when I recollect how often our hearts have beaten close to each other. Oh, said Montalais. Beware, my lamb. You are scattering your wool, and there are wolves about. Louise was about to reply, when the gallop of a horse resounded under the porch of the castle. What is that? Said Montalais, approaching the window. A handsome cavalier, by my faith. Oh, Raoul, exclaimed Louise, who had made the same movement as a friend, and, becoming pale as death, sunk back beside her unfinished letter. Now, he is a clever lover, upon my word, cried Montalais. He arrives just at the proper moment. Come in, I implore you, murmured Louise. Bow! He does not know me. Let me see what he has come here for. Chapter 2. The Messenger. Mademoiselle de Montalais was right. The young cavalier was goodly to look upon. He was a young man of from 24 to 25 years of age, tall and slender, wearing gracefully the picturesque military costume of the period. His large boots contained a foot which Mademoiselle de Montalais might not have disowned if she had been transformed into a man. With one of his delicate but nervous hands, he checked his horse in the middle of the court, and with the other raised his hat, whose long plumes shaded his at once serious and ingenuous countenance. The guards, roused by the steps of the horse, awoke and were on foot in a minute. The young man waited till one of them was close to his saddlebow, then stooping towards him, in a clear, distinct voice, which was perfectly audible at the window where the two girls are concealed, a message for His Royal Highness, he said. Ah, cried the soldier. Officer, a messenger. But this brave guard knew very well that no officer would appear, seeing that the only one who could have appeared dwelt at the other side of the castle, in an apartment looking into the gardens. So he hastened to add, the officer, monsieur, is on his rounds, but in his absence, M. de Saint Remy, the maitre d'hotel, shall be informed. M. de Saint Remy, repeated the cavalier, slightly blushing. "Do you know him?" "Why, yes, but request him, if you please, that my visit be announced to His Royal Highness as soon as possible." "It appears to be pressing," said the guard, as if speaking to himself, but really in the hope of obtaining an answer. The messenger made an affirmative sign with his head. "In that case," said the guard, "I will go and seek the maitre d'hotel myself." The young man, in the meantime, dismounted, and whilst the others were making their remarks upon the fine horse the cavalier rode, the soldier returned. "Your pardon, young gentleman, but your name, if you please?" "The Vicomte de Bragelonne, on the part of His Highness and the Prince de Condé." The soldier made a profound bow, and, as if the name of the conqueror of Rocroi and Sens had given him wings, he stepped lightly up the steps leading to the antechamber. M. de Bragelonne had not had time to fasten his horse to the iron bars of the perron when M. de Saint Remy came running, out of breath, supporting his capacious body with one hand, whilst with the other he cut the air as a fisherman cleaves the waves with his oar. "Ah, Monsieur le Vicomte, you at Blois?" cried he. "Well, that is a wonder. Good day to you. Good day, Monsieur Raoul. I offer you 1,000 respects, M. de Saint Remy." "How Madame de la Vaux, how delighted Madame de Saint Remy will be to see you. But come in. His Royal Highness is at breakfast. Must he be interrupted? Is the matter serious?" "Yes, and no, Monsieur de Saint Remy. A moment's delay, however, would be disagreeable to His Royal Highness." "If that is the case, we will force a consigne, Monsieur le Vicomte. Come in. Besides, Monsieur is in an excellent humor today. And then you bring news, do you not?" "Great news, Monsieur de Saint Remy." "And good, I presume." "Excellent." Come quickly, then," cried the worthy man, putting his dress to rights as he went along. Raoul followed him, head in hand, and a little disconcerted at the noise made by his spurs in these immense salons. As soon as he had disappeared in the interior of the palace, the window of the court was repeopled, and an animated whispering betrayed the emotion of the two girls. They soon appeared to have formed a resolution, for one of the two faces disappeared from the window. This was the brunette. The other remained behind the balcony, concealed by the flowers, watching attentively through the branches the perron by which M. de Bragelonne had entered the castle. In the meantime, the object of so much laudable curiosity continued his route, following the steps of the maitre d'hotel. The noise of quick steps, an odor of wine and viands, a clinking of crystalline plates, warned them that they were coming to the end of their course. The pages, valets, and officers, assembled in the office which led up to the refectory, welcomed the newcomer with the proverbial politeness of the country. Some of them were acquainted with Raoul, and all knew that he came from Paris. It might be said that his arrival for a moment suspended the service. In fact, a page, who was pouring out wine for His Royal Highness, on hearing the jingling of spurs in the next chamber, turned round like a child, without perceiving that he was continuing to pour out, not into the glass, but upon the tablecloth. Madame, who was not so preoccupied as her glorious spouse was, remarked this distraction of the page. "Well," exclaimed she. "Well," repeated Monsieur, "what is going on then?" M. de Saint Remy, who had just introduced his head through the doorway, took advantage of the moment. "Why am I to be disturbed?" said Gaston, helping himself to a thick slice of one of the largest salmon that had ever ascended the Loire to be captured between Paimboeuf and Saint-Nazaire. "There is a messenger from Paris." "Oh, but after Monseigneur has breakfasted will do. There is plenty of time." "From Paris?" cried the prince, letting his fork fall. "A messenger from Paris, do you say? And on whose part does this messenger come?" "On the part of M. le Prince," said the maitre d'hotel promptly. "Every one knows that the Prince de Condé was so called." "A messenger from M. le Prince," said Gaston, with an inquietude that escaped none of the assistants, and consequently redoubled the general curiosity. Monsieur, perhaps, fancied himself brought back again to the happy times when the opening of a door gave him an emotion in which every letter might contain a state secret, in which every message was connected with a dark and complicated intrigue. Perhaps, Likewise, that great name of M. le Prince expanded itself, beneath the roofs of Blois, to the proportions of a phantom. Monsieur pushed away his plate. "Shall I tell the envoy to wait?" asked M. de Saint Remy. A glance from Madame emboldened Gaston, who replied, "No, no. Let him come in at once. On the contrary. Apropos, who is he?" "A gentleman of this country, M. le Vicomte de Bragelonne." "Ah, very well. Introduce him. Saint Remy, introduce him." And when he had let fall these words, with his accustomed gravity, Monsieur turned his eyes, in a certain manner, upon the people of his suite, so that all pages, officers, and equerries quitted the service, knives and goblets, and made towards the second chamber a retreat as rapid as it was disorderly. This little army had dispersed in 2 files when Raoul de Bragelonne, preceded by M. de Saint Remy, entered the refectory. The short interval of solitude which this retreat had left him permitted Monsieur the time to assume a diplomatic countenance. He did not turn round, but waited till the maitre d'hotel should bring the messenger face to face with him. Raoul stopped even with the lower end of the table, so as to be exactly between Monsieur and Madame. From this place he made a profound bow to Monsieur and a very humble one to Madame. Then, drawing himself up into military pose, he waited for Monsieur to address him. On his part, the prince waited till the doors were hermetically closed. He would not turn round to ascertain the fact, as that would have been derogatory to his dignity, but he listened with all his ears for the noise of the lock, which would promise him at least an appearance of secrecy. The doors being closed, Monsieur raised his eyes towards the Vicomte, and said, "It appears that you come from Paris, Monsieur?" "This minute, Monseigneur." "How is the king?" "His Majesty is in perfect health, Monseigneur." "And my sister-in-law?" "Her Majesty the Queen Mother still suffers from complaint in her chest, but for the last month she has been rather better." "Somebody told me you came on the part of M. le Prince. They must have been mistaken. Surely—" "No, Monseigneur. M. le Prince has charged me to convey this letter to your Royal Highness, and I am to wait for an answer to it." Raoul had been a little annoyed by this cold and cautious reception, and his voice insensibly sank to a low key. The prince forgot that he was the cause of this apparent mystery, and his fears returned. He received a letter from a Prince de Condé with a haggard look, unsealed it as he would have unsealed a suspicious packet, and in order to read it so that no one should remark the effect of it upon his countenance, he turned round. Madame followed, with an anxiety almost equal to that of the prince, every maneuver of her august husband. Raoul, impassible, and a little disengaged by the attention of his hosts, looked from his place through the open window at the gardens and the statues which peopled them. "Well," cried Monsieur, all at once, with a cheerful smile, "here is an agreeable surprise, and a charming letter from M. le Prince. Look, Madame." The table was too large to allow the arm of the prince to reach the hand of Madame. Raoul sprang forward to be their intermediary, and did with so good a grace as to procure flattering acknowledgment from the princess. "You know the contents of this letter, no doubt," said Gaston to Raoul. "Yes, Monseigneur. M. le Prince at first gave me the message verbally, but upon reflection his Highness took up his pen." "It is beautiful writing," said Madame, "but I cannot read it." "Will you read it to Madame M. de Bragelonne?" said the Duke. "Yes, read it, if you please, Monsieur." Raoul began to read, Monsieur giving again all his attention. The letter was conceived in these terms: "Monseigneur, the king is about to set out for the frontiers. You are aware that the marriage of His Majesty is concluded upon. The king has done me the honor to appoint me as Maréchal des Logis for this journey, and as I knew with what joy His Majesty would pass a day at Blois, I venture to ask your Royal Highness's permission to mark the house you inhabit as our quarters. If, however, the suddenness of this request should create to your Royal Highness any embarrassment, I entreat you to say so by the messenger I send, a gentleman of my suite, M. le Vicomte de Bragelonne. My itinerary will depend upon your Royal Highness's determination, and instead of passing through Blois, we shall come through Vendôme and Romorantin. I venture to hope that your Royal Highness will be pleased with my arrangement, it being the expression of my boundless desire to make myself agreeable to you. Nothing can be more gracious toward us, said Madame, who had more than once consulted the looks of her husband during the reading of the letter. The king here, exclaimed she, in a rather louder tone than would have been necessary to preserve secrecy. Monsieur, said His Royal Highness in his tone, you will offer my thanks to M. de Condé, and express to him my gratitude for the honor he has done me. Raoul bowed. On what day will His Majesty arrive? Continued the prince. The king, Monseigneur, will in all probability arrive this evening. But how, then, could he have known my reply if it had been in the negative? I was desired, Monseigneur, to return in all haste to Beaugency, to give counter-orders to the courier, who was himself to go back immediately with counter-orders to M. le Prince. His Majesty is at Orleans. Then, much nearer, Monseigneur, His Majesty must by this time have arrived at Mons. Does the court accompany him? Yes, Monseigneur. Apropos, I forgot to ask you after M. le Cardinal. His Eminence appears to enjoy good health, Monseigneur. His nieces accompany him, no doubt. No, Monseigneur. His Eminence has ordered the Mademoiselle de Mancini to set out for Bruges. They will follow the left bank of the Loire, while the court will come by the right. What? Mademoiselle Mary de Mancini quit the court in that manner? Asked Monsieur, his reserve beginning to diminish. Mademoiselle Mary de Mancini in particular, replied Raoul discreetly. A fugitive smile, an imperceptible vestige of his ancient spirit of intrigue, shot across the pale face of the prince. Thanks, M. de Bragelonne. Then said Monsieur, you would, perhaps, not be willing to carry M. le Prince the commission with which I would charge you, and that is, that his messenger has been very agreeable to me, but I will tell him so myself. Raoul bowed his thanks to Monsieur for the honor he had done him. Monsieur made a sign to Madame, who struck a bell which was placed at her right hand. M. de Saint-Remy entered, and the room was soon filled with people. Messrs, said the prince, His Majesty is about to pay me the honor of passing a day at Blois. I depend upon the king, my nephew, not having to repent of the favor he does my house. Vive le roi! Cried all the officers of the household with frantic enthusiasm, and M. de Saint-Remy louder than the rest. Gaston hung down his head with evident chagrin. He had all his life been obliged to hear, or rather to undergo this cry of Vive le roi, which passed over him, for a long time, being unaccustomed to hear it. His ear had had rest, and now a younger, more vivacious, and more brilliant royalty rose up before him, like a new and more painful provocation. Madame perfectly understood the sufferings of that timid, gloomy hout. She rose from the table. Monsieur imitated her mechanically, and all the domestics, with a buzzing like that of several beehives, surrounded Raoul for the purpose of questioning him. Madame saw this movement, and called M. de Saint-Remy. This is not the time for gossiping, but working, said she, with the tone of an angry housekeeper. M. de Saint-Remy hastened to break the circle formed by the officers round Raoul, so that the latter was able to gain the antechamber. Care will be taken of that gentleman, I hope, added Madame, addressing M. de Saint-Remy. The worthy man immediately hastened after Raoul. Madame desires refreshments to be offered to you, said he, and there's, besides, a lodging for you in the castle. Thanks, M. de Saint-Remy, replied Raoul, but you know how anxious I must be to pay my duty to M. le Comte, my father. That is true, Monsieur Raoul. Present him, at the same time, my humble respects, if you please. Raoul thus once more got rid of the old gentleman, and pursued his way. As he was passing under the porch, leading his horse by the bridle, a soft voice called him from the depths of an obscure path. Monsieur Raoul, said the voice. The young man turned round, surprised, and saw a dark-complexioned girl, who, with a finger on her lip, held out her other hand to him. This young lady was an utter stranger. Chapter 3. The Interview. Raoul made one step towards the girl who thus called him. But my horse, Madame, said he. Oh, you are terribly embarrassed. Go yonder way. There is a shed in the outer court. Fasten your horse, and return quickly. I obey, Madame. Raoul was not 4 minutes in performing what he had been directed to do. He returned to the little door, where, in the gloom, he found his mysterious conductress waiting for him on the first steps of a winding staircase. "Are you brave enough to follow me, Monsieur Knight-errant?" asked the girl, laughing at the momentary hesitation Raoul had manifested. The letter replied by springing up the dark staircase after her. They thus climbed up 3 stories, he behind her, touching with his hands, when he felt for the banister, a silk dress which rubbed against each side of the staircase. At every false step made by Raoul, his conductress cried, "Hush!" and held out to him a soft and perfumed hand. "One would mount us to the belfry of the castle without being conscious of fatigue," said Raoul, "all of which means, monsieur, that you are very much perplexed, very tired, and very uneasy. But be of good cheer, monsieur. Here we are at our destination." The girl threw open a door, which immediately, without any transition, filled with a flood of light the landing of the staircase, at the top of which Raoul appeared, holding fast by the balustrade. The girl continued to walk on. He followed her. She entered a chamber. He did the same. As soon as he was fairly in the net, he heard a loud cry, and, turning round, saw at 2 paces from him, with her hands clasped and her eyes closed, that beautiful fair girl with blue eyes and white shoulders, who, recognizing him, called him Raoul. He saw her, and divined at once so much love and so much joy in the expression of her countenance, that he sank on his knees in the middle of the chamber, murmuring, on his part, the name of Louise. "Ah, Montalais, Montalais," she sighed, "it is very wicked to deceive me so." "Who? I? I have deceived you." "Yes, you told me you would go down to inquire the news, and you have brought up monsieur." "Well, I was obliged to do so. How else could he have received the letter you wrote him?" And she pointed with a finger to the letter, which was still upon the table. Raoul made a step to take it. Louise, more rapid, although she had sprung forward with sufficiently remarkable physical hesitation, reached out her hand to stop him. Raoul came in contact with a trembling hand, took it within his own, and carried it so respectfully to his lips that he might be said to have deposited a sigh upon it rather than a kiss. In the meantime, Mademoiselle de Montalais had taken the letter, folded it carefully, as women do, in 3 folds, and slipped it into her bosom. "Don't be afraid, Louise," said she. "Monsieur will no more venture to take it hence than the defunct King Louis XIII. ventured to take billets from the corsage of Mademoiselle de Hautefort." Raoul blushed at seeing the smile of the 2 girls, and he did not remark that the hand of Louise remained in his. "There," said Montalais, "you have pardoned me, Louise, for having brought monsieur to you, and you, monsieur, bear me no malice for having followed me to see mademoiselle. Now, then, peace being made, let us chat like old friends. Present me, Louise, to M. de Bragelonne." "Monsieur le Vicomte," said Louise, with a quiet grace and ingenuous smile, "I have the honor to present to you Mademoiselle de Montalais, maid of honor to Her Royal Highness, madam, and moreover my friend, my excellent friend." Raoul bowed ceremoniously. "And me, Louise," said he, "will you not present me also to mademoiselle?" "Oh, she knows you. She knows all." This unguarded expression made Montalais laugh and Raoul sigh with happiness, for he interpreted it thus: "She knows all our love." "The ceremonies being over, Monsieur le Vicomte," said Montalais, "take a chair, and tell us quickly the news you bring flying thus." "Mademoiselle, it is no longer a secret. The king, on his way to Poitiers, will stop at Blois to visit his Royal Highness." "The king here!" exclaimed Montalais, clapping her hands. "What? Are we going to see the court? Only think, Louise, the real court from Paris. Oh, good heavens! But when will this happen, monsieur?" "Perhaps this evening, mademoiselle, at latest, tomorrow." Montalais lifted her shoulders in sign of vexation. "No time to get ready. No time to prepare a single dress. We are as far behind the fashions as the Poles. We shall look like portraits of the time of Henry IV. Ah, monsieur, this is sad news you bring us. But, mademoiselle, you will be still beautiful." That's no news. Yes, we shall be always beautiful because nature has made us possible, but we shall be ridiculous because the fashion will have forgotten us. Alas, ridiculous. I shall be thought ridiculous. I? And by whom? Said Louise, innocently. By whom? You are a strange girl, my dear. Is that a question to put to me? I mean everybody. I mean the courtiers, the nobles. I mean the king. Pardon me, my good friend, but as everyone is accustomed to see us as we are. Granted, but that is about to change, and we shall be ridiculous, even for Blois. For clothes to us will be seen the fashion from Paris, and they will perceive that we are in the fashion of Blois. It is enough to make one despair. Console yourself, mademoiselle. Well, so let it be. After all, so much the worse for those who do not find me to their taste, said Montalais philosophically. They would be very difficult to please, replied Raoul, faithful to his regular system of gallantry. Thank you, Monsieur le Vicomte. We were saying, then, that the king is coming to Blois. With all the court. Mademoiselle de Mancini, will they be with them? No, certainly not. But as the king, it is said, cannot do without Mademoiselle Mary. Mademoiselle, the king must do without her. Le Cardinal will have it so. He has exiled his nieces to Bruges. He, the hypocrite. Hush, said Louise, pressing a finger on her friend's rosy lips. Bow, nobody can hear me. I say that old Mazzarino Mazzarini is a hypocrite, who burns impatiently to make his niece Queen of France. That cannot be, mademoiselle, since le Cardinal, on the contrary, has brought about the marriage of His Majesty with the Infanta Maria Theresa. Montalais looked Raoul full in the face, and said, And do you Parisians believe in these tales? Well, we are a little more knowing than you, at Blois. Mademoiselle, if the king goes beyond Poitiers and sets out for Spain, if the articles of the marriage contract are agreed upon by Don Louis de Haro and His Eminence, you must plainly perceive that it is not child's play. Oh, very fine. But the king is king, I suppose? No doubt, mademoiselle, but the cardinal is the cardinal. The king is not a man, then, and he does not love Mary Mancini. He adores her. Well, he will marry her then. We shall have war with Spain. Mazarin will spend a few of the millions he has put away. Our gentlemen will perform prodigies of valor in their encounters with the proud Castilians, and many of them will return crowned with laurels, to be recrowned by us with myrtles. Now, that is my view of politics. Montalais, you are wild, said Louise, and every exaggeration attracts you as light does a moth. Louise, you are so extremely reasonable that you will never know how to love. Oh, said Louise, in a tone of tender reproach. Don't you see, Montalais? The Queen Mother desires to marry her son to the Infanta. Would you wish him to disobey his mother? Is it for a royal heart like his to set such a bad example? When parents forbid love, love must be banished. And Louise sighed. Raoul cast down his eyes with an expression of constraint. Montalais, on her part, laughed aloud. Well, I have no parents, said she. You are acquainted, without doubt, with the state of health of le Comte de la Fée, said Louise, after breathing that sigh which had revealed so many griefs in its eloquent utterance. No, mademoiselle, replied Raoul. I have not yet paid my respect to my father. I was going to his house when Mademoiselle de Montalais so kindly stopped me. I hope the Comte is well. You have heard nothing to the contrary, have you? No, Raoul, nothing, thank God. Hey, for several instants, ensued a silence, during which two spirits, which followed the same idea, communicated perfectly, without even the assistance of a single glance. Oh, heavens! Exclaimed Montalais in affright. There is somebody coming up. Who can it be? Said Louise, rising in great agitation. Mademoiselle, I inconvenience you very much. I have, without doubt, been very indiscreet, stammered Raoul, very ill at ease. It is a heavy step, said Louise. Ah, if it is only M. Malicorne, added Montalais. "Do not disturb yourselves." Louise and Raoul looked at each other to inquire who M. Malicorne could be. "There is no occasion to mind him," continued Montalais. "He is not jealous." "But, mademoiselle," said Raoul. "Yes, I understand. Well, he is as discreet as I am." "Good heavens!" cried Louise, who had applied her ear to the door, which had been left ajar. "It is my mother's step." "Madame de Saint Remy, where shall I hide myself?" exclaimed Raoul, catching at the dress of Montalais, who looked quite bewildered. "Yes," said she, "yes, I know the clicking of those patterns. It is our excellent mother, M. le Vicomte. What pity it is the window looks upon a stone pavement, and that 50 paces below it." Raoul glanced at the balcony in despair. Louise seized his arm and held it tight. "Oh, how silly I am," said Montalais. "Have I not the robe of ceremony closet? It looks as if it were made on purpose." It was quite time to act. Madame de Saint Remy was coming up at a quicker pace than usual. She gained the landing at the moment when Montalais, as in all scenes of surprises, shut the closet by leaning with her back against the door. "Ah!" cried Madame de Saint Remy. "You are here, are you, Louise?" "Yes, madame," replied she, more pale than if she had committed a great crime. "Well, well." "Pray be seated, madame," said Montalais, offering her a chair, which he placed so that the back was towards the closet. "Thank you, mademoiselle, or thank you. Come, my child, be quick. Where do you wish me to go, madame?" "Why, home, to be sure. Have you not to prepare your toilette?" "What did you say?" cried Montalais, hastening to effect surprise. So fearful was she that Louise would in some way commit herself. "You don't know the news, then," said Madame de Saint Remy. "What news? Madame, is it possible for 2 girls to learn up in this dovecot?" "What? Have you seen nobody?" "Madame, you talk in enigmas, and you torment us at a slow fire," cried Montalais, who, terrified at seeing Louise become paler and paler, did not know to what saint to put up her vows. At length she caught an eloquent look of her companion's, one of those looks which would convey intelligence to a brick wall. Louise directed her attention to a hat, Raoul's unlucky hat, which was set out in all its feathery splendor upon the table. Montalais sprang towards it, and, seizing it with her left hand, passed it behind her into the right, concealing it as she was speaking. "Well," said Madame de Saint Remy, "a courier has arrived, announcing the approach of the king. There, mademoiselle, there is something to make you put on your best looks." "Quick, quick," cried Montalais. "Follow madame your mother, Louise, and leave me to get ready my dress of ceremony." Louise arose. Her mother took her by the hand and led her out onto the landing. "Come along," said she, then adding in a low voice, "When I forbid you to come to the apartment of Montalais, why do you do so?" "Madame, she is my friend. Besides, I had but just come." "Did you see nobody concealed while you were there?" "Madame, I saw a man's hat. I tell you, the hat of that fellow, that good-for-nothing." "Madame," repeated Louise, "of that do-nothing de Malicorne. A maid of honor to have such company. Fie, fie!" And their voices were lost in the depths of the narrow staircase. Montalais had not missed a word of this conversation, which echo conveyed to her as if through a tunnel. She shrugged her shoulders on seeing Raoul, who had listened likewise, issue from the closet. "Poor Montalais," said she, "the victim of friendship. Poor Malicorne, the victim of love." She stopped on viewing the tragicomic face of Raoul, who was vexed at having, in one day, surprised so many secrets. "Oh, mademoiselle," said he, "how can we repay your kindness?" "Oh, we will balance accounts some day," said she. "For the present, Burgon, M. de Bragelonne, for Madame de Saint Remy is not overindulgent, and any indiscretion on her part might bring hither a domiciliary visit, which would be disagreeable to all parties." "But Louise, how shall I know?" "Burgon, Burgon, King Louis XI knew very well what he was about when he invented the post." "Alas," sighed Raoul, And am I not here, I, who am worth all the posts in the kingdom? Quick, I say, to horse, so that if Madame de Saint Remy should return for the purpose of preaching me a lesson on morality, she may not find you here. She would tell my father, would she not? Murmured Raoul. And you would be scolded. Ah, Vicomte, it is very plain you come from court. You are as timid as a king. Pass. At Blois we contrive better than that to do without papa's consent. Ask Malicorne else. And at these words the girl pushed Raoul out of the room by the shoulders. He glided swiftly down to the porch, regained his horse, mounted, and set off as if he had Monsieur's guards at his heels. Chapter 4. Father and Son. Raoul followed the well-known road, so dear to his memory, which led from Blois to the residence of the Comte de la Fère. The reader will dispense with a second description of that habitation. He, perhaps, has been with us there before and knows it. Only, since our last journey thither, the walls had taken a grayer tint, and the brickwork assumed a more harmonious copper tone. The trees had grown, and many that then only stretched their slender branches along the tops of the hedges, now bushy, strong, and luxuriant, cast around, beneath boughs swollen with sap, great shadows of blossoms of fruit for the benefit of the traveler. Raoul perceived, from a distance, the two little turrets, the dovecot in the elms, and the flights of pigeons, which wheeled incessantly around that brick cone, seemingly without power to quit it, like the sweet memories which hover round a spirit at peace. As he approached, he heard the noise of the pulleys which grated under the weight of the messy pails. He also fancied he heard the melancholy moaning of the water which falls back again into the wells, a sad, funereal, solemn sound, which strikes the ear of the child and the poet, both dreamers, which the English call splash, Arabian poets, gascachow, and which we Frenchmen, who will be poets, can only translate by a paraphrase. The noise of water falling into water. It was more than a year since Raoul had been to visit his father. He had passed the whole time in the household of M. Le Prince. In fact, after all the commotions of the Fronde, of the early period of which we formerly attempted to give a sketch, Louis de Condé had made a public, solemn, and frank reconciliation with the court. During all the time of the rupture between the king and the prince had lasted, the prince, who had long entertained a great regard for Bragelonne, had in vain offered him advantages of the most dazzling kind for a young man. The Comte de la Fère, still faithful to his principles of loyalty and royalty, one day developed before his son in the vaults of St. Denis. The Comte de la Fère, in the name of his son, had always declined them. Moreover, instead of following M. de Condé in his rebellion, the Vicomte had followed M. de Turenne, fighting for the king. Then when M. de Turenne, in his turn, had appeared to abandon the royal cause, he had quitted M. de Turenne, as he had quitted M. de Condé. It resulted from this invariable line of conduct that, as Condé and Turenne had never been conquerors of each other but under the standard of the king, Raoul, however young, had 10 victories inscribed on his list of services, and not one defeat from which his bravery or conscience had to suffer. Raoul, therefore, had, in compliance with the wish of his father, served obstinately and passively the fortunes of Louis XIV. In spite of the tergiversations which were endemic and, it might be said, inevitable at that period, M. de Condé, on being restored to favor, had at once availed himself of all the privileges of the amnesty to ask for many things back again which had been granted him before, and among others, Raoul, M. de la Fère, with his invariable good sense, had immediately sent him again to the prince. A year, then, had passed away since the separation of the father and son. A few letters had softened, but not removed, the pains of absence. We have seen that Raoul had left at Blois another love in addition to filial love. But let us do him this justice. If it had not been for chance and Mademoiselle de Montalais, 2 great temptations, Raoul, after delivering his message, would have galloped off towards his father's house, turning his head round, perhaps, but without stopping for a single instant, even if Louise had held out her arms to him. So the first part of the journey was given by Raoul to regretting the past which he had been forced to quit so quickly, that is to say, his lady-love, and the other part to the friend he was about to join, so much too slowly for his wishes. Raoul found the garden gate open, and rode straight in, without regarding the long arms, raised in anger, of an old man dressed in a jacket of violet-colored wool and a large cap of faded velvet. The old man, who was weeding with his hands a bed of dwarf roses and marguerites, was indignant at seeing a horse thus traversing his sanded and nicely raked walks. He even ventured a vigorous humph, which made the cavalier turn round. Then there was a change of scene, for no sooner had he caught sight of Raoul's face than the old man sprang up and set off in the direction of the house, amidst interrupted growlings, which appeared to be paroxysms of wild delight. When arrived at the stables, Raoul gave his horse to a little lackey, and sprang up the perron with an ardor that would have delighted the heart of his father. He crossed the antechamber, the dining room, and the salon, without meeting with anyone. At length, on reaching the door of Anne de la Fere's apartment, he rapped impatiently, and entered almost without waiting for the word enter, which was vouchsafed him by a voice at once sweet and serious. The Comte was seated at a table covered with papers and books. He was still the noble, handsome gentleman of former days, but time had given to this nobleness and beauty a more solemn and distinct character. A brow white and void of wrinkles, beneath his long hair, now more white than black, an eye piercing and mild, under the lids of a young man. His mustache, fine but slightly grizzled, waved over the lips of a pure and delicate model, as if they had never been curled by mortal passions. A form straight and supple, an irreproachable but thin hand. This was what remained of the illustrious gentleman whom so many illustrious mouths had praised under the name of Athos. He was engaged in correcting the pages of a manuscript book, entirely filled by his own hand. Raoul seized his father by the shoulders, by the neck, as he could, and embraced him so tenderly and so rapidly that the Comte had neither strength nor time to disengage himself or to overcome his paternal emotions. "What? You here, Raoul? You? Is it possible?" said he. "Oh, monsieur, what joy to see you once again. But you don't answer me, Vicomte. Have you leave of absence, or has a misfortune happened at Paris?" "Thank God, monsieur," replied Raoul, calming himself by degrees. "Nothing has happened but what is fortunate. The king is going to be married, as I had the honor of informing you in my last letter, and, on his way to Spain, he will pass through Blois, to pay a visit to monsieur." "Yes, monsieur le Comte." So, fearing to find him unprepared, or wishing to be particularly polite to him, Monsieur le Prince sent me forward to have the lodgings ready. "You have seen monsieur?" asked the Vicomte, eagerly. "I have had that honor." "At the castle?" "Yes, monsieur," replied Raoul, casting down his eyes, because, no doubt, he had felt there was something more than curiosity in the Comte's inquiries. "Ah, indeed, Vicomte? Accept my compliments thereupon." Raoul bowed. "But you have seen someone else at Blois?" "Monsieur, I saw Her Royal Highness, Madame." "That's very well, but it is not Madame that I mean." Raoul colored deeply, but made no reply. "You do not appear to understand me, Monsieur le Vicomte," persisted Anne de la Fere, without accenting his words more strongly, but with a rather severe look. "I understand you quite plainly, monsieur," replied Raoul, "and if I hesitate a little in my reply, you are well assured I am not seeking for a falsehood." "No, you cannot tell a lie, and that makes me so astonished you should be so long in saying yes or no. I cannot answer you without understanding you very well, and if I have understood you, you will take my first words in ill part. You will be displeased, no doubt, Monsieur le Comte, because I have seen Mademoiselle de la Valliere, have you not?" "It was of her you meant to speak. I know very well, monsieur," said Raoul, with inexpressible sweetness. "And I asked you if you have seen her." "Monsieur, I was ignorant, when I entered the castle, that Mademoiselle de la Valliere was there. It was only on my return, after I had performed my mission, that chance brought us together. I have had the honor of paying my respects to her." "But what do you call the chance that led you into the presence of Mademoiselle de la Valliere?" "Mademoiselle de Montalais, monsieur." "And who is Mademoiselle de Montalais?" "A young lady I did not know before, whom I had never seen. She is maid of honor to Madame." "Monsieur le Vicomte, I will push my interrogatory no further, and reproach myself with having carried it so far. I had desired you to avoid Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and not to see her without my permission. Oh, I am quite sure you have told me the truth, and that you took no measures to approach her. Chance has done me this injury. I do not accuse you of it. I will be content, then, with what I formerly said to you concerning this young lady. I do not reproach her with anything. God is my witness. Only it is not my intention or wish that you should frequent her place of residence. I beg you once more, my dear Raoul, to understand that. It was plain the limpid eyes of Raoul were troubled at this speech. Now, my friend, said the Comte, with his soft smile and in his customary tone, let us talk of other matters. You are returning, perhaps, to your duty? No, monsieur, I have no duty for today, except the pleasure of remaining with you. The prince kindly appointed me no other, which was so much in accord with my wish. Is the king well? Perfectly. And monsieur le prince also. As usual, monsieur. The comte forgot to inquire after Mazarin. That was an old habit. Well, Raoul, since you are entirely mine, I will give up my whole day to you. Embrace me, again. You at home, Vicomte? Ah, there's our old Grimaud. Come in, Grimaud. Monsieur le Vicomte is desirous of embracing you likewise. The good old man did not require to be twice told. He rushed in with open arms, Raoul meeting him halfway. Now, if you please, we will go into the garden. Raoul, I will show you the new lodging I have had prepared for you during your leave of absence, and whilst examining the last winter's plantations and 2 saddle horses I have just acquired, you will give me all the news of our friends in Paris. The Comte closed his manuscript, took the young man's arm, and went out into the garden with him. Grimaud looked at Raoul with a melancholy air as the young man passed out. Observing that his head nearly touched the traverse of the doorway, stroking his white royal, he slowly murmured, "How he has grown." Chapter 5, in which something will be said of Cropoli and of a great unknown painter. Whilst the Comte de la Fere with Raoul visits the new buildings he has had erected and the new horses he has bought, with the reader's permission we will lead him back to the city of Blois and make him a witness of the unaccustomed activity which pervades that city. It was in the hotels that the surprise of the news brought by Raoul was most sensibly felt. In fact, the king and the court at Blois, that is to say, 100 horsemen, 10 carriages, 200 horses, as many lackeys as masters. Where was this crowd to be housed? Where were to be lodged all the gentry of the neighborhood, who would gather in 2 or 3 hours after the news had enlarged the circle of its report, like the increasing circumference produced by a stone thrown into a placid lake? Blois, as peaceful in the morning, as we have seen, as the calmest lake in the world, at the announcement of the royal arrival, was suddenly filled with the tumult and buzzing of a swarm of bees. All the servants of the castle, under the inspection of the officers, were sent into the city in quest of provisions, and 10 horsemen were dispatched to the preserves of Chambord to seek for game, to the fisheries of Beauvais for fish, and to the gardens of Cheverny for fruits and flowers. Precious tapestries, and lustres with great gilt chains, were drawn from the cupboards. An army of the poor were engaged in sweeping the courts and washing the stone fronts, whilst their wives went in droves to the meadows beyond the Loire to gather green boughs and field flowers. The whole city, not to be behind in this luxury of cleanliness, assumed its best toilette with the help of brushes, brooms, and water. The kennels of the upper town, swollen by these continued lotions, became rivers at the bottom of the city, and the pavement, generally very muddy, it must be allowed, took a clean face, and absolutely shone in the friendly rays of the sun. Next, the music was to be provided. Drawers were emptied. The shopkeepers did a glorious trade in wax, ribbons, and sword knots. Housekeepers laid in stores of bread, meat, and spices. Already numbers of the citizens whose houses were furnished as if for a siege, having nothing more to do, donned their festive clothes and directed their course towards the city gate, in order to be the first to signal or see the cortege. They knew very well that the king would not arrive before night, perhaps not before the next morning. Yet what is expectation but a kind of folly, and what is that folly but an excess of hope? in the lower city, at scarcely 100 paces from the castle of the States, between the mole and the castle, in a sufficiently handsome street, then called Rue Vieille, and which must, in fact, have been very old, stood a venerable edifice with pointed gables of squat but large dimensions, ornamented with 3 windows looking into the street on the first floor, with 2 in the second, and with a little oeil de boeuf in the third. On the sides of this triangle had recently been constructed a parallelogram of considerable size, which encroached upon the street remorselessly, according to the familiar uses of the building of that period. The street was narrowed by a quarter by it, but then the house was enlarged by a half, and was not that a sufficient compensation? Tradition said that this house with the pointed gables was inhabited, in the time of Henry III, by a councillor of state whom Queen Catherine came, some say to visit, and others to strangle. However that may be, the good lady must have stepped with a circumspect foot over the threshold of this building. After the councillor had died, whether by strangulation or naturally is of no consequence, the house had been sold, then abandoned, and lastly isolated from the other houses of the street, towards the middle of the reign of Louis XIII. Only an Italian, named Cropoli, escaped from the kitchens of the Marquis d'Enca, came and took possession of this house. They established a little hostelry, in which was fabricated a macaroni so delicious that people came from miles round to fetch it or eat it. So famous had the house become for it, that when Mary de' Medici was a prisoner, as we know, in the castle of Blois, she once sent for some. It was precisely on the day she had escaped by the famous window. The dish of macaroni was left upon the table, only just tasted by the royal mouth. This double favor, of a strangulation and a macaroni, conferred upon the triangular house, gave poor Cropoli a fancy to grace his hostelry with a pompous title. But his quality of an Italian was no recommendation in these times, and his small, well-concealed fortune forbade attracting too much attention. When he found himself about to die, which happened in 1643, just after the death of Louis XIII, he called to him his son, a young cook of great promise, and with tears in his eyes, he recommended him to preserve carefully the secret of the macaroni, to Frenchify his name, and at length, when the political horizon should be cleared from the clouds which obscured it, this was practiced then as in our day, to order of the nearest smith a handsome sign, upon which a famous painter, whom he named, should design 2 queens' portraits, with these words as a legend, to the Medici. The worthy Cropoli, after these recommendations, had only sufficient time to point out to his young successor a chimney, under the slab of which he had hidden 1,000 10-franc pieces, and then expired. Cropoli the younger, like a man of good heart, supported the loss with resignation, and the gain without insolence. He began by accustoming the public to sound the final I of his name so little, that by the aid of general complaisance, he was soon called nothing but M. Cropoli, which is quite a French name. He then married, having had in his eye a little French girl, from whose parents he extorted a reasonable dowry by showing them what there was beneath the slab of the chimney. These 2 points accomplished, he went in search of the painter who was to paint the sign, and he was soon found. He was an old Italian, a rival of the Raphaels and the Carracci, but an unfortunate rival. He said he was of the Venetian school, doubtless from his fondness for color. His works, of which he had never sold one, attracted the eye at a distance of 100 paces, but they so formidably displeased the citizens that he had finished by painting no more. He boasted of having painted a bathroom for Madame la Marquise d'Enca, and mourned over this chamber having been burnt at the time of the Marical's disaster. Cropoli, in his character of a compatriot, was indulgent towards Petrino, which was the name of the artist. Perhaps he had seen the famous pictures of the bathroom. Be this as it may, he held in such esteem, we may say in such friendship, the famous Petrino, that he took him in his own house. Petrino, grateful, and fed with macaroni, set about propagating the reputation of this national dish, and from the time of its founder, he had rendered, with his indefatigable tongue, signal services to the house of Cropoli. As he grew old, he attached himself to the son as he had done to the father, and by degrees became a kind of overlooker of a house in which his remarkable integrity, his acknowledged sobriety, and 1,000 other virtues useless to enumerate, gave him an eternal place by the fireside, with a right of inspection over the domestics. Besides this, it was he who tasted the macaroni to maintain the pure flavor of the ancient tradition, and it must be allowed that he never permitted a grain of pepper too much, or an atom of parmesan too little. His joy was at its height on that day when called upon to share the secret of Cropper the Younger and to paint the famous sign. He was seen at once rummaging with ardor in an old box, in which he found some brushes, a little gnawed by the rats, but still passable, some colors and bladders almost dried up, some linseed oil in a bottle, and a palette which had formerly belonged to Bronzino, that Daillou de la Péter, as the ultramontane artist, in his ever-young enthusiasm, always called him. Petrino was puffed up with all the joy of a rehabilitation. He did as Raphael had done. He changed his style and painted, in the fashion of the Albanian, 2 goddesses rather than 2 queens. These illustrious ladies appeared so lovely on the sign. They presented to the astonished eye such an assemblage of lilies and roses, the enchanting result of the change of style in Petrino. They assumed the poses of sirens so anachronically, that the principal Echevin, when admitted to view this capital piece in the cell of Cropole, at once declared that these ladies were too handsome, of too animated a beauty, to figure as a sign in the eyes of passers-by. To Petrino he added, "His Royal Highness, Monsieur, who often comes into our city, will not be much pleased to see his illustrious mother so slightly clothed, and he will send you to the oubliettes of the state. For, remember, the heart of that glorious prince is not always tender. You must efface either the 2 sirens or the legend, without which I forbid the exhibition of the sign. I say this for your sake, Master Cropole, as well as for yours, Signor Petrino." What answer could be made to this? It was necessary to thank the Echevin for his kindness, which Cropole did, but Petrino remained downcast and said he felt assured of what was about to happen. The visitor was scarcely gone when Cropole, crossing his arms, said, "Well, master, what is to be done?" "We must efface the legend," said Petrino, in a melancholy tone. "I have some excellent ivory black. It will be done in a moment, and we will replace the Medici by the nymphs or the sirens, whichever you prefer." "No," said Cropole, "the will of my father must be carried out." My father considered. "He considered the figures of the most importance," said Petrino. "He thought most of the legend," said Cropole. "The proof of the importance in which he held the figures," said Petrino, "is that he desired they should be likenesses, and they are so." "Yes, but if they had not been so, who would have recognized them without the legend? At the present day even, when the memory of the Blaisois begins to be faint with regard to these 2 celebrated persons, who would recognize Catherine and Mary without the word to the Medici?" "But the figures," said Petrino, in despair, for he felt that young Cropole was right. "I should not like to lose the fruit of my labor. And I should not wish you to be thrown into prison and myself into the oubliettes." "Let us efface Medici," said Petrino, supplicatingly. "No," replied Cropole, firmly. "I have got an idea, a sublime idea. Your picture shall appear, and my legend likewise. Does not Medici mean doctor or physician in Italian?" "Yes, in the plural." "Well, then, you shall order another sign frame of the smith. You shall paint 6 physicians, and write underneath Auxiliary Medici, which makes a very pretty play upon words." 6 physicians. Impossible. "And the composition," cried Petrino. "That is your business. But so it shall be. I insist upon it. It must be so. My macaroni is burning." This reasoning was peremptory. Petrino obeyed. He composed the sign of 6 physicians, with the legend. The Echevin applauded and authorized it. The sign produced an extravagant success in the city, which proves that poetry has always been in the wrong, before citizens, as Petrino said. Cropole, to make amends to his pain in ordinary, hung up the nymphs of the preceding sign in his bedroom, which made Madame Cropole blush every time she looked at it, when she was undressing at night. This is the way in which the pointed gable house got a sign, and this is how the hostelry of the Medici, making a fortune, was found to be enlarged by a quarter, as we have described. And this is how there was at Blois a hostelry of that name, and had for painter in ordinary Master Petrino. Chapter 6. The Unknown. Thus founded and recommended by its sign, the hostelry of Master Croppelet held its way steadily on towards a solid prosperity. It was not an immense fortune that Croppelet had in perspective, but he might hope to double the 1,000 louis d'or left by his father, to make another 1,000 louis by the sale of his house and stock, and at length to live happily like a retired citizen. Croppelet was anxious for gain, and was half crazy with joy at the news of the arrival of Louis XIV. Himself, his wife, Petrino, and 2 cooks, immediately laid hands upon all the inhabitants of the Dovecote, the poultry yard, and the rabbit hutches, so that as many lamentations and cries resounded in the yards of the hostelry of the Medici as were formerly heard in Rammer. Croppelet had, at the time, but one single traveller in his house. This was a man of scarcely 30 years of age, handsome, tall, austere, or rather melancholy, in all his gestures and looks. He was dressed in black velvet with jet trimmings, a white collar, as plain as the severest Puritan, set off the whiteness of his youthful neck. A small dark-colored mustache scarcely covered his curled, disdainful lip. He spoke to people looking them full in the face without affectation, it is true, but without scruple, so that the brilliancy of his black eyes became so insupportable that more than one look had sunk beneath as like the weakest sword in a single combat. At this time, in which men, all created equal by God, were divided, thanks to prejudices, into 2 distinct castes, the gentleman and the commoner, as they are really divided into 2 races, the black and the white. At this time, we say, he whose portrait we have just sketched could not fail of being taken for a gentleman and of the best class. To ascertain this, there was no necessity to consult anything but his hands, long, slender, and white, of which every muscle, every vein, became apparent through the skin at the least movement, and eloquently spoke of good descent. This gentleman, then, had arrived alone at Croppeau's house. He had taken, without hesitation, without reflection even, the principal apartment which the hotelier had pointed out to him with a rapacious aim, very praiseworthy, some will say, very reprehensible will say others, if they admit that Croppelet was a physiognomist and judged people at first sight. This apartment was that which composed the whole front of the ancient triangular house, a large salon, lighted by 2 windows on the first stage, a small chamber by the side of it, and another above it. Now, from the time he had arrived, this gentleman had scarcely touched any repast that had been served up to him in his chamber. He had spoken but 2 words to the host, to warn him that a traveller of the name of Parry would arrive, and to desire that, when he did, he should be shown up to him immediately. He afterwards preserved so profound a silence that Croppelet was almost offended. So much did he prefer people who were good company. This gentleman had risen early the morning of the day on which this history begins, and had placed himself at the window of his salon, seated upon the ledge, and leaning upon the rail of the balcony, gazing sadly but persistently on both sides of the street, watching, no doubt, for the arrival of the traveller he had mentioned to the host. In this way he had seen the little cottage of Monsieur return from hunting, then had again partaken of the profound tranquillity of the street, absorbed in his own expectations. All at once the movement of the crowd going to the meadows, couriers setting out, washers of pavement, purveyors of the royal household, gabbling, scampering shop-boys, chariots in motion, hairdressers on the run, and pages toiling along. This tumult and bustle had surprised him, but without losing any of that impassible and supreme majesty which gives to the eagle and the lion that serene and contemptuous glance amidst the hurrahs and shouts of hunters or the curious. Soon the cries of the victims slaughtered in the poultry yard, the hasty steps of Madame Croppelet up that little wooden staircase, so narrow and so echoing, the bounding pace of Petrino, who only that morning was smoking at the door with all the phlegm of a Dutchman. All this communicated something like surprise and agitation to the traveller. As he was rising to make inquiries, the door of his chamber opened. The unknown concluded they were about to introduce the impatiently expected traveller, and made 3 precipitate steps to meet him. But, instead of the person he expected, it was Master Croppelet who appeared, and behind him, in the half-dark staircase, the pleasant face of Madame Croppelet, rendered trivial by curiosity. She only gave one furtive glance at the handsome gentleman, and disappeared. Croppelet advanced, cap in hand, rather bent than bowing. A gesture of the unknown interrogated him. without a word being pronounced. "Monsieur," said Cropole, "I come to ask how. What ought I to say? Your lordship, Monsieur le Comte, or Monsieur le Marquis?" "Say Monsieur, and speak quickly," replied the unknown, with a haughty accent which admits of neither discussion nor reply. "I came, then, to inquire how Monsieur had passed the night, and if Monsieur intended to keep this apartment." "Yes." "Monsieur, something has happened upon which we could not reckon." "What?" "His Majesty Louis XIV will enter our city today and will remain here one day, perhaps two." Great astonishment was painted on the countenance of the unknown. "The King of France coming to Boao." "He is on the road, Monsieur." "Then there is a stronger reason for my remaining," said the unknown. "Very well, but will Monsieur keep all the apartments?" "I do not understand you. Why should I require less today than yesterday?" "Because, Monsieur, your lordship will permit me to say, yesterday I did not think proper, when you chose your lodging, to fix any price that might have made your lordship believe I prejudged your resources, whilst today—" The unknown colored. The idea at once struck him that he was supposed to be poor and was being insulted. "Whilst today," replied he, coldly, "you do prejudge." "Monsieur, I am a well-meaning man, thank God, and simple hotelier as I am, there is in me the blood of a gentleman. My father was a servant and officer of the late Maréchal d'Ancre. God rest his soul. I do not contest that point with you. I only wish to know, and that quickly, to what your questions tend. You are too reasonable, Monsieur, not to comprehend that our city is small, that the court is about to invade it, that the houses will be overflowing with inhabitants, and that lodgings will consequently obtain considerable prices." Again the unknown colored. "Name your terms," said he. "I name them with scruple, Monsieur, because I seek an honest gain, and that I wish to carry on my business without being uncivil or extravagant in my demands. Now the room you occupy is considerable, and you are alone." "That is my business." "Oh, certainly. I do not mean to turn Monsieur out." The blood rushed to the temples of the unknown. He darted at poor Cropole, the descendant of one of the officers of the Maréchal d'Ancre, a glance that would have crushed him down to beneath that famous chimney slab, if Cropole had not been nailed to the spot by the question of his own proper interests. "Do you desire me to go?" said he. "Explain yourself, but quickly." "Monsieur, you do not understand me. It is very critical. I know that which I am doing. I express myself badly, or perhaps, as Monsieur is a foreigner, which I perceive by his accent." In fact, the unknown spoke with that impetuosity which is the principal character of English accentuation, even among men who speak the French language with the neatest purity. "As Monsieur is a foreigner, I say, it is perhaps he who does not catch my exact meaning. I wish Monsieur to give up one or two of the apartments he occupies, which would diminish his expenses and ease my conscience. Indeed, it is hard to increase unreasonably the price of the chambers, when one has had the honor to let them at a reasonable price." "How much does the hire amount to since yesterday?" "Monsieur, to 1 louis, with refreshments and the charge for the horse." "Very well, and that of today?" "Ah, there is the difficulty. This is the day of the king's arrival. If the court comes to sleep here, the charge of the day is reckoned. From that it results that 3 chambers, at 2 louis each, make 6 louis. 2 louis, Monsieur, are not much, but 6 louis make a great deal." The unknown, from red, as we have seen him, became very pale. He drew from his pocket, with heroic bravery, a purse embroidered with a coat of arms, which he carefully concealed in the hollow of his hand. This purse was of a thinness, a flabiness, a hollowness, which did not escape the eye of Cropole. The unknown emptied the purse into his hand. It contained 3 double louis, which amounted to the 6 louis demanded by the host. But it was 7 that Cropole had required. He looked, therefore, at the unknown, as much as to say, "And then, there remains 1 louis, does there not, Master Hotelier?" "Yes, Monsieur, but—" The unknown plunged his hand into the pocket of his haute de chose and emptied it. It contained a small pocketbook, a gold key, and some silver. With this change he made up a louis. "Thank you, monsieur," said Cropole. "It now only remains for me to ask whether monsieur intends to occupy his apartments tomorrow, in which case I will reserve them for him. Whereas, if monsieur does not mean to do so, I will promise them to some of the king's people who are coming." "That is but right," said the unknown after a long silence. "But as I have no more money, as you have seen, and as I yet must retain the apartments, you must either sell this diamond in the city or hold it in pledge." Cropole looked at the diamond so long that the unknown said, hastily, "I prefer your selling it, monsieur, for it is worth 300 pistoles. A Jew, are there any Jews in Blois, would give you 200 or 150 for it. Take whatever may be offered for it, if it be no more than the price of your lodging. Begone!" "Oh, monsieur," replied Cropole, ashamed of the sudden inferiority which the unknown reflected upon him by this noble and disinterested confidence, as well as by the unalterable patience opposed to so many suspicions and evasions. "Oh, monsieur, I hope people are not so dishonest at Blois as you seem to think, and that the diamond, being worth what you say." The unknown here again darted at Cropole one of his withering glances. "I really do not understand diamonds, monsieur, I assure you," cried he. "But the jewelers do. Ask them," said the unknown. "Now I believe our accounts are settled. Are they not, Monsieur Elhote?" "Yes, monsieur, and to my profound regret, for I fear I have offended monsieur." "Not at all," replied the unknown with ineffable majesty, "or have appeared to be extortionate with a noble traveller. Consider, monsieur, the peculiarity of the case. Say no more about it, I desire, and leave me to myself." Cropole bowed profoundly, and left the room with a stupefied air which announced that he had a good heart and felt genuine remorse. The unknown himself shut the door after him, and when left alone, looked mournfully at the bottom of the post, from which he had taken a small silken bag containing the diamond, his last resource. He dwelt likewise upon the emptiness of his pockets, turned over the papers in his pocketbook, and convinced himself of the state of absolute destitution in which he was about to be plunged. He raised his eyes towards heaven, with a sublime emotion of despairing calmness, brushed off with his hand some drops of sweat which trickled over his noble brow, and then cast down upon the earth a look which just before had been impressed with almost divine majesty. That the storm had passed far from him, perhaps he had prayed in the bottom of his soul. He drew near to the window, resumed his place in the balcony, and remained there, motionless, annihilated, dead, till the moment when, the heavens beginning to darken, the first flambeaux traversed the enlivened street, and gave the signal for illumination to all the windows of the city. Chapter 7. Paris. Whilst the unknown was viewing these lights with interest, and lending an ear to the various noises, Master Cropole entered his apartment, followed by 2 attendants, who laid the cloth for his meal. The stranger did not pay them the least attention, but Cropole, approaching him respectfully, whispered, "Monsieur, the diamond has been valued." "Ah," said the traveller. Well, monsieur, the jeweller of S.A.R. gives 280 pistoles for it." "Have you them?" "I thought it best to take them, monsieur. Nevertheless, I made it a condition of the bargain that if monsieur wished to keep his diamond, it should be held till monsieur was again in funds." "Oh, no, not at all. I told you to sell it." "Then I have obeyed, or nearly so, since, without having definitely sold it, I have touched the money." "Pay yourself," added the unknown. "I will do so, monsieur, since you so positively require it." A sad smile passed over the lips of the gentleman. "Place the money on that trunk," said he, turning round and pointing to the piece of furniture. Cropole deposited a tolerably large bag as directed, after having taken from it the amount of his reckoning. "Now," said he, "I hope monsieur will not give me the pain of not taking any supper. Dinner has already been refused. This is affronting to the house of Les Medici. Look, monsieur, the supper is on the table, and I venture to say that it is not a bad one." The unknown asked for a glass of wine, broke off a morsel of bread, and did not stir from the window whilst he ate and drank. Shortly after was heard a loud flourish of trumpets. Cries arose in the distance. A confused buzzing filled the lower part of the city, and the first distinct sound that struck the ears of the stranger was the tramp of advancing horses. The king! The king! Repeated a noisy and eager crowd. The king! Cried Cropole, abandoning his guests and his ideas of delicacy to satisfy his curiosity. With Cropole were mingled and jostled on the staircase Madame Cropole, Petrino, and the waiters and scullions. The cortege advanced slowly, lighted by 1,000 flambeaux, in the streets and from the windows. After a company of musketeers, a closely ranked troop of gentlemen, came the litter of Monsieur le Cardinal, drawn like a carriage by 4 black horses. The pages and people of the cardinal marched behind. Next came the carriage of the Queen Mother, with her maids of honor at the doors, her gentlemen on horseback at both sides. The king then appeared, mounted upon a splendid horse of Saxon breed, with a flowing menere. The young prince exhibited, when bowing to some windows from which issued the most animated acclamations, a noble and handsome countenance, illumined by the flambeaux of his pages. By the side of the king, though a little in the rear, the Prince de Condé, M. Dingo, and 20 other courtiers, followed by their people and their baggage, closed this veritably triumphant march. The pomp was of a military character. Some of the courtiers, the elder ones, for instance, wore traveling dresses, but all the rest were clothed in warlike panoply. Many wore the gorgeous and buff coat of the times of Henry IV and Louis XIII. When the king passed before him, the unknown, who had leant forward over the balcony to obtain a better view, and who had concealed his face by leaning on his arm, felt his heart swell and overflow with a bitter jealousy. The noise of the trumpets excited him. The popular acclamations deafened him. For a moment he allowed his reason to be absorbed in this flood of lights, tumult, and brilliant images. "He is a king," murmured he, in an accent of despair. Then, before he had recovered from his somber reverie, all the noise, all the splendor, had passed away. At the angle of the street there remained nothing beneath the stranger but a few hoarse, discordant voices, shouting at intervals, "Vive le Roi!" There remained likewise the 6 candles held by the inhabitants of the Hostelry des Medici, that is to say, 2 for Cropole, 2 for Petrino, and 1 for each scullion. Cropole never ceased repeating, "How good-looking the king is! How strongly he resembles his illustrious father!" "A handsome likeness," said Petrino. "And what a lofty carriage he has," added Madame Cropole, already in promiscuous commentary with her neighbors of both sexes. Cropole was feeding their gossip with his own personal remarks, without observing that an old man on foot, but leading a small Irish horse by the bridle, was endeavoring to penetrate the crowd of men and women, which blocked up the entrance to the Medici. But at that moment the voice of the stranger was heard from the window. "Make way, Monsieur Hatelia, to the entrance of your house." Cropole turned around, and, on seeing the old man, cleared a passage for him. The window was instantly closed. Petrino pointed out the way to the newly arrived guest, who entered without uttering a word. The stranger waited for him on the landing. He opened his arms to the old man and led him to a seat. "Oh, no, no, my lord," said he. "Sit down in your presence. Never." "Parry," cried the gentleman, "I beg you will. You come from England. You come so far. Ah, it is not for your age to undergo the fatigues my service requires. Rest yourself. I have my reply to give your lordship, in the first place. Parry, I conjure you to tell me nothing, for if your news had been good, you would not have begun in such a manner. You go about, which proves that the news is bad." "My lord," said the old man, "do not hasten to alarm yourself. All is not lost, I hope. You must employ energy, but more particularly resignation." "Parry," said the young man, "I have reached this place through 1,000 snares and after 1,000 difficulties. Can you doubt my energy? I have meditated this journey 10 years, in spite of all counsels and all obstacles. Have you faith in my perseverance? I have this evening sold the last of my father's diamonds, for I had nothing wherewith to pay for my lodging, and my host was about to turn me out. Parry made a gesture of indignation, to which the young man replied by a pressure of the hand and a smile. I have still 274 pistoles left, and I feel myself rich. I do not despair. Parry, have you faith in my resignation? The old man raised his trembling hands towards heaven. Let me know, said the stranger. Disguise nothing from me. What has happened? My recital will be short, my lord, but in the name of heaven do not tremble so. It is impatience. Parry, come, what did the general say to you? At first the general would not receive me. He took you for a spy. Yes, my lord, but I wrote him a letter. Well, he read it and received me, my lord. Did that letter thoroughly explain my position and my views? Oh, yes, said Parry, with a sad smile. It painted your very thoughts faithfully. Well, then, Parry. Then the general sent me back the letter by an aide-de-camp, informing me that if I were found the next day within the circumscription of his command, he would have me arrested. Arrested, murmured the young man. What? Arrest you, my most faithful servant. Yes, my lord. And notwithstanding you had signed the name Parry. To all my letters, my lord, and the aide-de-camp had known me at St. James's and at Whitehall, too, added the old man with a sigh. The young man leaned forward, thoughtful and sad. Ay, that's what he did before his people, said he, endeavoring to cheat himself with hopes. But, privately, between you and him, what did he do? Answer. Alas, my lord, he sent to me 4 cavaliers, who gave me the horse with which you just now saw me come back. These cavaliers conducted me, in great haste, to the little port of Tenby, threw me, rather than embark me, into a fishing boat about to sail for Brittany, and here I am. Oh, sighed the young man, clasping his neck convulsively with his hand, and with a sob. Parry, is that all? Is that all? Yes, my lord, that is all. After this brief reply ensued a long interval of silence, broken only by the convulsive beating of the heel of the young man on the floor. The old man endeavored to change the conversation. It was leading to thoughts much too sinister. My lord, said he, what is the meaning of all the noise which preceded me? What are these people crying Vive le Roi for? What king do they mean? And what are all these lights for? Ah, Parry, replied the young man ironically, don't you know that this is the King of France visiting his good city of Blois? All those trumpets are his. All those gilded housings are his. All those gentlemen wear swords that are his. His mother precedes him in a carriage magnificently encrusted with silver and gold. Happy mother! His minister heaps up millions, and conducts him to a rich bride. Then all these people rejoice. They love their king. They hail him with their acclamations, and they cry, Vive le Roi! Vive le Roi! Well, my lord, said Parry, more uneasy at the turn the conversation had taken than at the other. You know, resumed the unknown, that my mother and my sister, whilst all this is going on in honor of the King of France, have neither money nor bread. You know that I myself shall be poor and degraded within a fortnight, when all Europe will become acquainted with what you have told me. Parry, are there not examples in which a man of my condition should himself? My lord, in the name of heaven. You are right. Parry, I am a coward, and if I do nothing for myself, what will God do? No, I have 2 arms, Parry, and I have a sword. And he struck his arm violently with his hand, and took down his sword, which hung against the wall. What are you going to do, my lord? What am I going to do, Parry? What every one in my family does. My mother lives on public charity. My sister begs of my mother. I have, somewhere or other, brothers who equally beg for themselves. And I, the eldest, will go and do as all the rest do. I will go and ask charity. And at these words, which he finished sharply with a nervous and terrible laugh, the young man girded on his sword, took his hat from the trunk, fastened to his shoulder a black cloak, which he had worn during all his journey, and pressing the two hands of the old man, who watched his proceedings with a look of anxiety. "My good Perry," said he, "order fire, drink, eat, sleep, and be happy. Let us both be happy, my faithful friend, my only friend. We are rich as kings." He struck the bag of pistoles with his clenched hand as he spoke, and it fell heavily to the ground. He resumed that dismal laugh that had so alarmed Perry, and whilst the whole household was screaming, singing, and preparing to install the travellers who had been preceded by their lackeys, he glided out by the principal entrance into the street, where the old man, who had gone to the window, lost sight of him in a moment. Chapter 8. What His Majesty King Louis XIV was at the age of 22. It has been seen, by the account we have endeavored to give of it, that the entry of King Louis XIV into the city of Blois had been noisy and brilliant. His young Majesty had therefore appeared perfectly satisfied with it. On arriving beneath the porch of the Castle of the States, the king met, surrounded by his guards and gentlemen, with S.A.R. the Duke, Gaston of Orleans, whose physiognomy, naturally rather majestic, had borrowed on this solemn occasion a fresh luster and a fresh dignity. On her part, Madame, dressed in her robes of ceremony, awaited, in the interior balcony, the entrance of her nephew. All the windows of the old castle, so deserted and dismal on ordinary days, were resplendent with ladies and lights. It was then to the sound of drums, trumpets, and vivats that the young king crossed the threshold of that castle in which, 72 years before, Henry III had called in the aid of assassination and treachery to keep upon his head and in his house a crown which was already slipping from his brow to fall into another family. All eyes, after having admired the young king, so handsome and so agreeable, sought for that other king of France, much otherwise king than the former, and so old, so pale, so bent, that people called him the Cardinal Mazarin. Louis was at this time endowed with all the natural gifts which make the perfect gentleman. His eye was brilliant, mild, and of a clear azure blue. But the most skilful physiognomists, those divers into the soul, on fixing their looks upon it, if it had been possible for a subject to sustain the glance of the king, the most skilful physiognomists, we say, would never have been able to fathom the depths of that abyss of mildness. It was with the eyes of the king as with the immense depths of the azure heavens, or with those more terrific and almost as sublime, which the Mediterranean reveals under the keels of its ships in a clear summer day, a gigantic mirror in which heaven delights to reflect sometimes its stars, sometimes its storms. The king was short of stature. He was scarcely 5 feet 2 inches, but his youth made up for this defect, set off likewise by great nobleness in all his movements and by considerable address in all bodily exercises. Certes, he was already quite a king, and it was a great thing to be a king in that period of traditional devotedness and respect. But as, up to that time, he had been but seldom and always poorly shown to the people, as they to whom he was shown saw him by the side of his mother, a tall woman, and Monsieur le Cardinal, a man of commanding presence, many found him so little of a king as to say, "Why, the king is not so tall as Monsieur le Cardinal." Whatever may be thought of these physical observations, which were principally made in the capital, the young king was welcomed as a god by the inhabitants of Blois, and almost like a king by his uncle and aunt, monsieur and madame, the inhabitants of the castle. It must, however, be allowed that when he saw, in the hall of reception, chairs of equal height placed for himself, his mother, the cardinal, and his uncle and aunt, a disposition artfully concealed by the semicircular form of the assembly, Louis XIV became red with anger, and looked around him to ascertain by the countenances of those that were present if this humiliation had been prepared for him. But as he saw nothing upon the impassible visage of the cardinal, nothing on that of his mother, nothing on those of the assembly, he resigned himself and sat down, taking care to be seated before anybody else. The gentlemen and ladies were presented to their majesties and Monsieur le Cardinal. The king remarked that his mother and he scarcely knew the names of any of the persons who were presented to them, whilst the cardinal, on the contrary, never failed, with an admirable memory and presence of mind, to talk to everyone about his estates, his ancestors, or his children, some of whom he named, which enchanted those worthy country gentlemen, and confirmed them in the idea that he alone is truly king who knows his subjects. from the same reason that the sun has no rival, because the sun alone warms and lightens. The study of the young king, which had begun a long time before, without anybody suspecting it, was continued then, and he looked around him attentively to endeavor to make out something in the physiognomies which had at first appeared the most insignificant and trivial. A collation was served. The king, without daring to call upon the hospitality of his uncle, had waited for it impatiently. This time, therefore, he had all the honors due, if not to his rank, at least to his appetite. As to the cardinal, he contented himself with touching with his withered lips a bouillon served in a gold cup. The all-powerful minister, who had taken her regency from the queen and his royalty from the king, had not been able to take a good stomach from nature, and of Austria, already suffering from the cancer which 6 or 8 years after cause of death, ate very little more than the cardinal. For Monsieur, already puffed up with the great event which had taken place in his provincial life, he ate nothing whatever. Madame alone, like a true Lorrainer, kept pace with his majesty, so that Louis XIV, who, without this partner, might have eaten nearly alone, was at first much pleased with his aunt, and afterwards with M. de Saint Remy, her maître d'hôtel, who had really distinguished himself. The collation over, at a sign of approbation from M. de Mazarin, the king arose, and, at the invitation of his aunt, walked about among the ranks of the assembly. The ladies then observed. There are certain things for which women are as good observers at Blois as at Paris. The ladies then observed that Louis XIV had a prompt and bold look, which premised a distinguished appreciator of beauty. The men, on their part, observed that the prince was proud and haughty, that he loved to look down those who fixed their eyes upon him too long or too earnestly, which gave presage of a master. Louis XIV had accomplished about a third of his review when his ears were struck with a word which his eminence pronounced whilst conversing with Monsieur. This word was the name of a woman. Scarcely had Louis XIV heard this word than he heard, or rather listened to nothing else, and neglecting the arc of the circle which awaited his visit, his object seemed to be to come as quickly as possible to the extremity of the curve. Monsieur, like a good courtier, was inquiring of Monsieur le Cardinal after the health of his nieces. He regretted, he said, not having the pleasure of receiving them at the same time with their uncle. They must certainly have grown in stature, beauty, and grace, as they had promised to do the last time Monsieur had seen them. What had first struck the king was a certain contrast in the voices of the two interlocutors. The voice of Monsieur was calm and natural while he spoke thus, while that of M. de Mazarin jumped by a note and a half to reply above the diapason of his usual voice. It might have been said that he wished that voice to strike, at the end of the salon, any that was too distant. Monseigneur, replied he, Mademoiselle de Mazarin have still to finish their education. They have duties to fulfill, and a position to make. An abode in a young and brilliant court would dissipate them a little. Louis, at this last sentence, smiled sadly. The court was young, it was true, but the avarice of the cardinal had taken good care that it should not be brilliant. You have nevertheless no intention, replied Monsieur, to cloister them or make them beaux wowsers. Not at all, replied the cardinal, forcing his Italian pronunciation in such a manner that, from soft and velvety as it was, it became sharp and vibrating. Not at all. I have a full and fixed intention to marry them, and that as well as I shall be able. Parties will not be wanting, Monsieur le Cardinal, replied Monsieur, with a bonhomie worthy of one tradesman congratulating another. I hope not, Monseigneur, and with reason, as God has been pleased to give them grace, intelligence, and beauty. During this conversation, Louis XIV, conducted by Madame, accomplished, as we have described, the circle of presentations. Mademoiselle Auricule, said the princess, presenting to his majesty a fat, fair girl of 22, who at a village fete might have been taken for a peasant in Sunday finery, the daughter of my music mistress. The king smiled. Madame had never been able to extract 4 correct notes from either viol or harpsichord. Mademoiselle de Montalais, continued Madame, a young lady of rank, and my good attendant. This time it was not the king that smiled. It was a young lady presented, because, for the first time in her life, she heard, given to her by Madame, who generally showed no tendency to spoil her, such an honorable qualification. Our old acquaintance Montalais, therefore, made His Majesty a profound courtesy, the more respectful from the necessity she was under of concealing certain contractions of her laughing lips, which the king might not have attributed to their real cause. It was just at this moment that the king caught the word which startled him. "And the name of the third?" asked Monsieur. "Mary, Monseigneur," replied the cardinal. There was doubtless a magical influence in that word, for, as we have said, the king started at hearing it, and drew Madame towards the middle of the circle, as if he wished to put some confidential question to her. But, in reality, for the sake of getting nearer to the cardinal. "Madame, my aunt," said he, laughing, and in a suppressed voice, "my geography master did not teach me that Blois was at such an immense distance from Paris." "What do you mean, nephew?" asked Madame. "Why, because it would appear that it requires several years, as regards fashion, to travel the distance. Look at those young ladies." "Well, I know them all. Some of them are pretty." "Don't say that too loud. Monsieur, my nephew, you will drive them wild." Stop a bit, dear aunt," said the king, smiling, "for the second part of my sentence will serve as a corrective to the first. Well, my dear aunt, some of them appear old and others ugly, thanks to their 10-year-old fashions. But, sire, Blois is only 5 days' journey from Paris." "Yes, that is it," said the king, 2 years behind for each day." "Indeed? Do you really think so? Well, that is strange. It never struck me." "Now, look, aunt," said Louis XIV, drawing still nearer to Mazarin, under the pretext of gaining a better point of view. "Look at that simple white dress by the side of those antiquated specimens of finery and those pretentious coiffures. She is probably one of my mother's maids of honor, though I don't know her." Ah, my dear nephew," replied Madame, laughing, "permit me to tell you that your divinatory science is at fault for once. The young lady you honor with your praise is not a Parisian, but a Blaiseuse." "Oh, aunt," replied the king with a look of doubt. "Come here, Louise," said Madame, and the fair girl, already known to you under that name, approached them, timid, blushing, and almost bent beneath the royal glance. "Mademoiselle Louise Francoise de la Beaume Leblanc, the daughter of the Marquise de la Valliere," said Madame, ceremoniously. The young girl bowed with so much grace, mingled with a profound timidity inspired by the presence of the king, that the latter lost, while looking at her, a few words of the conversation of Monsieur and the cardinal. "Daughter-in-law," continued Madame, "of M. de Saint Remy, my maitre d'hotel, who presided over the confection of the excellent daube truffe which your majesty seemed so much to appreciate. No grace, no youth, no beauty could stand out against such a presentation." The king smiled. Whether the words of Madame were a pleasantry, or uttered in all innocency, they proved the pitiless immolation of everything that Louis had found charming or poetic in the young girl. Mademoiselle de la Valliere, for Madame, and, by rebound, for the king, was, for a moment, no more than the daughter of a man of a superior talent over din d'Estraphes. But princes are thus constituted. The gods, too, were just like this in Olympus. Diana and Venus, no doubt, abused the beautiful Alcmene and poor Io when they condescended, for distraction's sake, to speak, amidst nectar and ambrosia, of mortal beauties, at the table of Jupiter. Fortunately, Louise was so bent in a reverential salute that she did not catch either Madame's words or the king's smile. In fact, if the poor child, who had so much good taste as alone to have chosen to dress herself in white amidst all her companions, if that dove's heart, so easily accessible to painful emotions, had been touched by the cruel words of Madame or the egotistical cold smile of the king, it would have annihilated her. And Montalais herself, the girl of ingenious ideas, would not have attempted to recall her to life, for ridicule kills beauty even. But fortunately, as we have said, Louise, whose ears were buzzing, and her eyes veiled by timidity, Louise saw nothing and heard nothing, and the king, who had still his attention directed to the conversation of the cardinal and his uncle, hastened to return to them. He came up just at the moment Mazarin terminated by saying, "Mary, as well as her sisters, has just set off for Bruges. I make them follow the opposite bank of the Loire to that along which we have traveled, and if I calculate their progress correctly, according to the orders I have given, they will tomorrow be opposite Boal." These words are pronounced with that tact, that measure, that distinctness of tone, of intention, and reach, which made Del Signo Giulio Mazarini the first comedian in the world. It resulted that they went straight to the heart of Louis XIV, and the cardinal, on turning round at the simple noise of the approaching footsteps of His Majesty, saw the immediate effect of them upon the countenance of his pupil, an effect betrayed to the keen eyes of His Eminence by a slight increase of color. But what was the ventilation of such a secret to him whose craft had for 20 years deceived all the diplomatists of Europe? From the moment the young king heard these last words, he appeared as if he had received a poisoned arrow in his heart. He could not remain quiet in a place, but cast around an uncertain, dead, and aimless look over the assembly. He with his eyes interrogated his mother more than 20 times. But she, given up to the pleasure of conversing with her sister-in-law, and likewise constrained by the glance of Mazarin, did not appear to comprehend any of the supplications conveyed by the looks of her son. From this moment, music, lights, flowers, beauties, all became odious and insipid to Louis XIV. After he had 100 times bitten his lips, stretched his legs and his arms like a well-brought-up child who, without daring to gape, exhausts all the modes of evincing his weariness, after having uselessly again implored his mother and the minister, he turned a despairing look towards the door, that is to say, towards liberty. At this door, in the embrasure which he was leaning, he saw, standing out strongly, a figure with a brown and lofty countenance, an aquiline nose, a stern but brilliant eye, gray and long hair, a black mustache, the true type of military beauty, whose gorget, more sparkling than a mirror, broke all the reflected lights which concentrated upon it, and sent them back as lightning. This officer wore his grey hat with its long red plumes upon his head, a proof that he was called there by his duty, and not by his pleasure. If he had been brought thither by his pleasure, if he had been a courtier instead of a soldier, as pleasure must always be paid for at the same price, he would have held his hat in his hand. That which proved still better that this officer was upon duty, and was accomplishing a task to which he was accustomed, was that he watched, with folded arms, remarkable indifference, and supreme apathy, the joys and ennuis of this fate. Above all, he appeared, like a philosopher, and all old soldiers are philosophers, he appeared above all to comprehend the ennuis infinitely better than the joys. But in the one he took his part, knowing very well how to do without the other. Now, he was leaning, as we have said, against the carved door-frame when the melancholy, weary eyes of the king, by chance, met his. It was not the first time, as it appeared, that the eyes of the officer had met those eyes, and he was perfectly acquainted with the expression of them. For, as soon as he had cast his own look upon the countenance of Louis XIV, and had read by it what was passing in his heart, that is to say, all the ennui that oppressed him, all the timid desire to go out which agitated him, he perceived he must render the king a service without his commanding it, almost in spite of himself. Boldly, therefore, as if he had given the word of command to cavalry in battle. "On the king's service," cried he, in a clear, sonorous voice. At these words, which produced the effect of a peal of thunder, prevailing over the orchestra, the singing and the buzz of the promenaders, the cardinal and the queen mother looked at each other with surprise. Louis XIV, pale, but resolved, supported as he was by the intuition of his own thought which he had found in the mind of the officer of musketeers, and which he had just manifested by the order given, arose from his chair, and took a step towards the door. "Are you going, my son?" said the queen, whilst Mazarin satisfied himself with interrogating by a look which might have appeared mild if it had not been so piercing. "Yes, madam," replied the king. "I am fatigued, and, besides, wish to write this evening." A smile stole over the lips of the minister, who appeared, by a bend of the head, to give the king permission. Monsieur and Madame hastened to give orders to the officers who presented themselves. The king bowed, crossed the hall, and gained the door, where a hedge of 20 musketeers awaited him. At the extremity of this hedge stood the officer, impassible, with his drawn sword in his hand. The king passed, and all the crowd stood on tiptoe to have one more look at him. 10 musketeers, opening the crowd of the antechambers and the steps, made way for his majesty. The other 10 surrounded the king and monsieur, who had insisted upon accompanying his majesty. The domestics walked behind. This little cortege escorted the king to the chamber destined for him. The apartment was the same that had been occupied by Henry III. During his sojourn in the States, Monsieur had given his orders. The musketeers, led by their officer, took possession of the little passage by which one wing of the castle communicates with the other. This passage was commenced by a small square antechamber, dark even in the finest days. Monsieur stopped Louis XIV. "You are passing now, sire," said he, "the very spot where the Duc de Guise received the first stab of the poniard." The king was ignorant of all historical matters. He had heard of the fact, but he knew nothing of the localities or the details. "Ah," said he with a shudder, and he stopped. The rest, both behind and before him, stopped likewise. "The Duc, sire," continued Gaston, "was nearly where I stand. He was walking in the same direction as your majesty. M. de Lognes was exactly where your lieutenant of musketeers is. M. de Saint-Melini and his majesty's ordinaries were behind him and around him. It was here that he was struck." The king turned towards his officer and saw something like a cloud pass over his martial and daring countenance. "Yes, from behind," murmured the lieutenant, with a gesture of supreme disdain, and he endeavored to resume the march, as if ill at ease at being between walls formerly defiled by treachery. But the king, who appeared to wish to be informed, was disposed to give another look at this dismal spot. Gaston perceived his nephew's desire. "Look, sire," said he, taking a flambeau from the hands of M. de Saint-Remy. "This is where he fell. There was a bad day, the curtains of which he tore with catching at them." "Why does the floor seem hollowed out at this spot?" asked Louis. "Because it was here the blood flowed," replied Gaston. "The blood penetrated deeply into the oak, and it was only by cutting it out that they succeeded in making it disappear. And even then," added Gaston, pointing the flambeau to the spot, "even then this red stain resisted all the attempts made to destroy it." Louis XIV. raised his head. Perhaps he was thinking of that bloody trace that had once been shown him at the Louvre, and which, as a pendant to that of Blois, had been made there one day by the king his father with the blood of Concini. "Let us go on," said he. The march was resumed promptly, for emotion, no doubt, had given to the voice of the young prince a tone of command which was not customary with him. When arrived at the apartment destined for the king, which communicated not only with the little passage we have passed through, but further with the great staircase leading to the court. "Will your majesty," said Gaston, "condescend to occupy this apartment, all unworthy as it is to receive you?" "Uncle," replied the young king, "I render you my thanks for your cordial hospitality." Gaston bowed to his nephew, embraced him, and then went out. Of the 20 musketeers who had accompanied the king, 10 reconducted Monsieur to the reception rooms, which were not yet empty, notwithstanding the king had retired. The 10 others were posted by their officer, who himself explored, in 5 minutes, all the localities, with that cold and certain glance which not even habit gives unless that glance belongs to genius. Then, when all were placed, he chose as his headquarters the antechamber, in which he found a large fauteuil, a lamp, some wine, some water, and some dry bread. He refreshed his lamp, drank half a glass of wine, curled his lip with a smile full of expression, installed himself in his large armchair, and made preparation for sleeping. Chapter 9, in which the unknown of the hostelry of Les Medici loses his incognito. This officer, who was sleeping, or preparing to sleep, was, notwithstanding his careless air, charged with a serious responsibility. Lieutenant of the king's musketeers, he commanded all the company which came from Paris, and that company consisted of 120 men. But, with the exception of the 20 of whom we have spoken, the other 100 were engaged in guarding the Queen Mother, and more particularly the Cardinal. Monsignor Giulio Mazarini economized the traveling expenses of his guards. He consequently used the king's, and that largely, since he took 50 of them for himself, a peculiarity which would not have failed to strike anyone unacquainted with the usages of that court. That which would still further have appeared, if not inconvenient, at least extraordinary, to a stranger, was that the side of the castle destined for Monsieur le Cardinal was brilliant, light, and cheerful. The musketeers then mounted guard before every door, and allowed no one to enter, except the couriers, who, even while he was traveling, followed the cardinal for the carrying on of his correspondence. 20 men were on duty with the Queen Mother. 30 rested, in order to relieve their companions the next day. On the king's side, on the contrary, were darkness, silence, and solitude. When once the doors were closed, there was no longer an appearance of royalty. All the servitors had by degrees retired. Monsieur le Prince had sent to know if His Majesty required his attendance, and on the customary no of the lieutenant of musketeers, who was habituated to the question and the reply, all appeared to sink into the arms of sleep, as if in the dwelling of a good citizen. And yet it was possible to hear from the side of the house occupied by the young king the music of the banquet, and to see the windows of the great hall richly illuminated. 10 minutes after his installation in his apartment, Louis XIV had been able to learn, by movement much more distinguished than marked his own leaving, the departure of the cardinal, who, in his turn, sought his bedroom, accompanied by a large escort of ladies and gentlemen. Besides, to perceive this movement, he had nothing to do but to look out at his window, the shutters of which had not been closed. His Eminence crossed the court, conducted by Monsieur, who himself held a flambeau, then followed the Queen Mother, to whom Madame familiarly gave her arm, and both walked chatting away, like two old friends. Behind these two couples filed nobles, ladies, pages, and officers. The flambeaux gleamed over the whole court, like the moving reflections of a conflagration. Then the noise of steps and voices became lost in the upper floors of the castle. No one was then thinking of the king, who, leaning on his elbow at his window, had sadly seen pass away all that light, and heard that noise die off. No, not one, if it was not that unknown of the hostelry des Medici, whom we have seen go out, enveloped in his cloak. He had come straight up to the castle, and had, with his melancholy countenance, wandered round and round the palace, from which the people had not yet departed, and finding that no one guarded the great entrance, or the porch, seeing that the soldiers of Monsieur were fraternizing with the royal soldiers, that is to say, swallowing Beaugency at discretion, or rather indiscretion, the unknown penetrated through the crowd, then ascended to the court, and came to the landing of the staircase leading to the cardinal's apartment. What, according to all probability, induced him to direct his steps that way was the splendor of the flambeaux and the busy air of the pages and domestics. But he was stopped short by a presented musket and the cry of the sentinel. "Where are you going, my friend?" asked the soldier. "I am going to the king's apartment," replied the unknown, haughtily but tranquilly. The soldier called one of His Eminence's officers, who, in the tone in which a youth in office directs a solicitor to a minister, let fall these words, "The other staircase, in front." And the officer, without further notice of the unknown, resumed his interrupted conversation. The stranger, without reply, directed his steps towards a staircase pointed out to him. On this side there was no noise, there were no more flambeaux. Obscurity, through which a sentinel glided like a shadow, silence, which permitted him to hear the sound of his own footsteps, accompanied with the jingling of his spurs upon the stone slabs. This guard was one of the 20 musketeers appointed for attendance upon the king, and who mounted guard with the stiffness and consciousness of a statue. "Who goes there?" said the guard. "A friend," replied the unknown. "What do you want?" "To speak to the king." "Do you, my dear monsieur? That's not very likely." "Why not?" "Because the king has gone to bed." "Gone to bed already?" "Yes." "No matter, I must speak to him. And I tell you that is impossible. And yet, go back. Do you require the word? I have no account to render to you. Stand back." And this time the soldier accompanied his word with a threatening gesture, but the unknown stirred no more than if his feet had taken root. "Monsieur le Musketeer," said he, "are you a gentleman?" "I have that honor." Very well. I also am one, and between gentlemen some consideration ought to be observed. The soldier lowered his arms, overcome by the dignity with which these words were pronounced. Speak, monsieur, said he, and if you ask me anything in my power. Thank you. You have an officer, have you not? Our lieutenant? Yes, monsieur. Well, I wish to speak to him. Oh, that's a different thing. Come up, monsieur. The unknown saluted the soldier in a lofty fashion and ascended the staircase, whilst a cry, "Lieutenant, a visit," transmitted from sentinel to sentinel, preceded the unknown and disturbed the slumbers of the officer. Dragging on his boots, rubbing his eyes, and hooking his cloak, the lieutenant made 3 steps towards the stranger. "What can I do to serve you, monsieur?" asked he. "You are the officer on duty, lieutenant of the Musketeers. Are you?" "I have that honor," replied the officer. "Monsieur, I must absolutely speak to the king." The lieutenant looked attentively at the unknown, and in that look, however rapid, he saw all he wished to see, that is to say, a person of high distinction in an ordinary dress. "I do not suppose you to be mad," replied he, "and yet you seem to me to be in a condition to know, monsieur, that people do not enter king's apartments in this manner without his consent." "He will consent." "Monsieur, permit me to doubt that. The king has retired this quarter of an hour. He must be now undressing. Besides, the word is given. When he knows who I am, he will recall the word." The officer was more and more surprised, more and more subdued. "If I consent to announce you, may I at least know whom to announce, monsieur?" "You will announce His Majesty Charles II, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland." The officer uttered a cry of astonishment, drew back, and there might be seen upon his pallid countenance one of the most poignant emotions that ever an energetic man endeavored to drive back to his heart. "Oh, yes, sire. In fact," said he, "I ought to have recognized you." "You have seen my portrait. Then—" "No, sire. Or else you have seen me formerly at court, before I was driven from France." "No, sire, it is not even that." "How then could you have recognized me, if you have never seen my portrait or my person?" "Sire, I saw His Majesty your father at a terrible moment." "The day?" "Yes." A dark cloud passed over the brow of the prince. Then, dashing his hand across it, "Do you still see any difficulty in announcing me?" said he. "Sire, pardon me," replied the officer, "but I could not imagine a king under so simple an exterior, and yet I had the honor to tell your majesty just now that I had seen Charles I. But pardon me, monsieur, I will go and inform the king." But returning after going a few steps, "Your majesty is desirous, without doubt, that this interview should be a secret," said he. "I do not require it, but if it were possible to preserve it." "It is possible, sire, for I can dispense with informing the first gentleman on duty. But, for that, your majesty must please to consent to give up your sword." "True, true. I had forgotten that no one armed is permitted to enter the chamber of a king of France." "Your majesty will form an exception, if you wish it, but then I shall avoid my responsibility by informing the king's attendant. Here is my sword, monsieur. Will you now please to announce me to His Majesty?" "Instantly, sire." And the officer immediately went and knocked at the door of communication, which the valet opened to him. "His Majesty the King of England," said the officer. "His Majesty the King of England," replied the valet de chambre. At these words a gentleman opened the folding doors of the king's apartment, and Louis XIV. was seen, without hat or sword, and his pourpoint open, advancing with signs of the greatest surprise. "You, my brother, you at Blois," cried Louis XIV., dismissing with a gesture both the gentleman and the valet de chambre, who passed out into the next apartment. "Sire," replied Charles II., "I was going to Paris, in the hope of seeing your majesty, when report informed me of your approaching arrival in this city. I therefore prolonged my abode here, having something very particular to communicate to you. Will this closet suit you, my brother?" Perfectly well, sire, for I think no one can hear us here. I have dismissed my gentleman and my watcher. They are in the next chamber. Behind that partition, is a solitary closet, looking into the antechamber. And in that antechamber you found nobody but a solitary officer. Did you? No, sire. Well, then, speak. My brother, I listen to you. Sire, I commence, and entreat your majesty to have pity on the misfortunes of our house. The King of France colored, and drew his chair closer to that of the King of England. Sire, said Charles II, I have no need to ask if your majesty is acquainted with the details of my deplorable history. Louis XIV blushed, this time more strongly than before. Then, stretching forth his hand to that of the King of England, my brother, said he, I am ashamed to say so, but the cardinal scarcely ever speaks of political affairs before me. Still more, formerly I used to get Laporte, my valet de chambre, to read historical subjects to me, but he put a stop to these readings and took away Laporte from me, so that I beg my brother Charles to tell me all those matters as to a man who knows nothing. Well, sire, I think that by taking things from the beginning I shall have a better chance of touching the heart of your majesty. Speak on, my brother, speak on. You know, sire, that being called in 1650 to Edinburgh, during Cromwell's expedition into Ireland, I was crowned at Scone. A year after, wounded in one of the provinces he had usurped, Cromwell returned upon us. To meet him was my object, to leave Scotland was my wish. And yet, interrupted the young king, Scotland is almost your native country, is it not, my brother? Yes, but the Scots were cruel compatriots for me, sire. They had forced me to forsake the religion of my fathers. They had hung Lord Montrose, the most devoted of my servants, because he was not a Covenanter, and as the poor martyr, to whom they had offered a favor when dying, had asked that his body might be cut into as many pieces as there are cities in Scotland, in order that evidence of his fidelity might be met with everywhere. I could not leave one city, or go into another, without passing under some fragments of a body which had acted, fought, and breathed for me. By a bold, almost desperate march, I passed through Cromwell's army and entered England. The Protector set out in pursuit of this strange flight, which had a crown for its object. If I had been able to reach London before him, without doubt the prize of the race would have been mine. But he overtook me at Worcester. The genius of England was no longer with us, but with him. On the 5th of September, 1651, sire, the anniversary of the other battle of Dunbar, so fatal to the Scots, I was conquered. 2,000 men fell around me before I thought of retreating a step. At length I was obliged to fly. From that moment my history became a romance. Pursued with persistent inveteracy, I cut off my hair. I disguised myself as a woodman. One day spent amidst the branches of an oak gave to that tree the name of the royal oak, which it bears to this day. My adventures in the county of Stafford, whence I escaped with the daughter of my host on a pillion behind me, still fill the tales of the country firesides, and would furnish matter for ballads. I will some day write all this, sire, for the instruction of my brother kings. I will first tell how, on arriving at the residence of Mr. Norton, I met with a court chaplain, who was looking on at a party playing at skittles, and an old servant who named me, bursting into tears, and who was as near and as certainly killing me by fidelity as another might have been by treachery. Then I will tell of my terrors, yes, sire, of my terrors, when, at the house of Colonel Wyndham, a farrier who came to shoe our horses declared they had been shot in the north. How strange, murmured Louis XIV. I never heard anything of all that. I was only told of your embarkation at Brighthelmstone and your landing in Normandy. Oh, exclaimed Charles, if heaven permits kings to be thus ignorant of the histories of each other, how can they render assistance to their brothers who need it? But tell me, continued Louis XIV, how, after being so roughly received in England, you can still hope for anything from that unhappy country and that rebellious people. Oh, sire, since the Battle of Worcester, everything is changed there. Cromwell is dead, after having signed a treaty with France, in which his name is placed above yours. He died on the 5th of September, 1658, a fresh anniversary of the battles of Dunbar and Worcester. His son has succeeded him. But certain men have a family, sire, and no heir. The inheritance of Oliver was too heavy for Richard. Richard was neither a Republican nor a Royalist. Richard allowed his guards to eat his dinner, and his generals to govern the Republic. Richard abdicated the Protectorate on the 22nd of April, 1659, more than a year ago, sire. From that time, England is nothing but a tennis court, in which the players throw dice for the crown of my father. The two most eager players are Lambert and Monk. Well, sire, I, in my turn, wish to take part in this game, where the stakes are thrown upon my royal mantle. Sire, it only requires 1 million to corrupt one of these players and make an ally of him, or 200 of your gentlemen to drive them out of my palace at Whitehall, as Christ drove the money changers from the temple. You come, then, replied Louis XIV, to ask me for your assistance, that is to say, not only for that which kings owe to each other, but that which simple Christians owe to each other, your assistance, sire, either in money or men. Your assistance, sire, and within a month, whether I oppose Lambert to Monk or Monk to Lambert, I shall have reconquered my paternal inheritance, without having cost my country a guinea, or my subjects a drop of blood, for they are now all drunk with revolutions, protectorates, and republics, and ask nothing better than to fall staggering to sleep in the arms of royalty. Your assistance, sire, and I shall owe you more than I owe my father, my poor father, who bought at so dear a rate the ruin of our house. You may judge, sire, whether I am unhappy, whether I am in despair, for I accuse my own father. And the blood mounted to the pale face of Charles II, who remained for an instant with his head between his hands, and as if blinded by that blood which appeared to revolt against the filial blasphemy. The young king was not less affected than his elder brother. He threw himself about in his fauteuil, and could not find a single word of reply. Charles II, to whom 10 years in age gave a superior strength to master his emotions, recovered his speech the first. Sire, said he, your reply? I wait for it as a criminal waits for his sentence. Must I die? My brother, replied the French prince, you ask me for 1 million, me, who was never possessed of a quarter of that sum. I possess nothing. I am no more king of France than you are king of England. I am a name, a cipher dressed in fleur-de-lis velvet. That is all. I am upon a visible throne. That is my only advantage over your majesty. I have nothing. I can do nothing. Can it be so? Exclaimed Charles II. My brother, said Louis, sinking his voice, I have undergone miseries with which my poorest gentlemen are unacquainted. If my poor Laporte were here, he would tell you that I have slept in ragged sheets, through the holes of which my legs have passed. He would tell you that afterwards, when I asked for carriages, they brought me conveyances half destroyed by the rats of the coach houses. He would tell you that when I asked for my dinner, the servants went to the cardinal's kitchen to inquire if there were any dinner for the king. And look, today, this very day even, when I am 22 years of age, today, when I have attained the grade of the majority of kings, today, when I ought to have the key of the treasury, the direction of the policy, the supremacy in peace and war, cast your eyes around me, see how I am left. Look at this abandonment, this disdain, this silence, whilst yonder, look yonder, view the bustle, the lights, the homage. There you see the real king of France, my brother, in the cardinal's apartments. Yes, in the cardinal's apartments. Then I am condemned, sire. Louis XIV made no reply. Condemned is the word, for I will never solicit him who left my mother and sister to die with cold and hunger, the daughter and granddaughter of Henry IV, if them de Retz in the Parliament had not sent them wood and bread. To die, murmured Louis XIV. Well, continued the King of England, poor Charles II, grandson of Henry IV, as you are, sire, having neither Parliament nor Cardinal de Retz to apply to, will die of hunger, as his mother and sister had nearly done. Louis knitted his brow and twisted violently the lace of his ruffles. This prostration, This immobility, serving as a mark to an emotion so visible, struck Charles II, and he took the young man's hand. "Thanks," said he, "my brother. You pity me, and that is all I can require of you in your present situation." "Sire," said Louis XIV, with a sudden impulse, and raising his head, "it is 1,000,000 you require, or 200 gentlemen, I think you say." "Sire, 1,000,000 would be quite sufficient." "That is very little. Offered to a single man, it is a great deal. Convictions have been purchased at a much lower price, and I should have nothing to do but with venalities. 200 gentlemen. Reflect, that is little more than a single company." "Sire, there is in our family a tradition, and that is that 4 French gentlemen devoted to my father, when near saving my father, though condemned by Parliament, guarded by an army and surrounded by a nation. Then if I can procure you 1,000,000 or 200 gentlemen, you will be satisfied, and you will consider me your well-affectioned brother. I shall consider you as my savior, and if I recover the throne of my father, England will be, as long as I reign at least, a sister to France, as you will have been a brother to me." "Well, my brother," said Louis, rising, "what you hesitate to ask for, I will myself demand. That which I have never done on my own account, I will do on yours. I will go and find the King of France, the other, the rich, the powerful one, I mean. I will myself solicit this 1,000,000, or these 200 gentlemen, and we will see." "Oh," cried Charles, "you are a noble friend, sire, a heart created by God. You save me, my brother, and if you should ever stand in need of the life you restore me, demand it." "Silence, my brother, silence," said Louis in a suppressed voice. "Take care that no one hears you. We have not obtained our end yet. To ask money of Mazarin, that is worse than traversing the enchanted forest, each tree of which enclosed a demon. It is more than setting out to conquer a world. But yet, sire, when you ask it—" "I have already told you that I never asked," replied Louis with a haughtiness that made the King of England turn pale. And as the latter, like a wounded man, made a retreating movement, "Pardon me, my brother," replied he. "I have neither a mother nor a sister who are suffering. My throne is hard and naked, but I am firmly seated on my throne. Pardon me that expression, my brother, it was that of an egotist. I will retract it. Therefore, by a sacrifice, I will go to Monsieur le Cardinal. Wait for me, if you please. I will return." Chapter 10. The Arithmetic of M. de Mazarin. Whilst the king was directing his course rapidly towards a wing of the castle occupied by the cardinal, taking nobody with him but his valet de chambre, the officer of musketeers came out, breathing like a man who has for a long time been forced to hold his breath, from the little cabinet of which we have already spoken, and which the king believed to be quite solitary. This little cabinet had formerly been part of the chamber, from which it was only separated by a thin partition. It resulted that this partition, which was only for the eye, permitted the ear the least indiscreet to hear every word spoken in the chamber. There was no doubt, then, that this lieutenant of musketeers had heard all that passed in His Majesty's apartment, warned by the last words of the young king. He came out just in time to salute him on his passage, and to follow him with his eyes till he had disappeared in the corridor. Then, as soon as he had disappeared, he shook his head after a fashion peculiarly his own, and in a voice which 40 years' absence from Gascony had not deprived of its Gascon accent, "A melancholy service," said he, "and a melancholy master." These words pronounced, the lieutenant resumed his place in his fauteuil, stretched his legs, and closed his eyes, like a man who either sleeps or meditates. During this short monologue and the mise-en scene that had accompanied it, whilst the king, through the long corridors of the old castle, proceeded to the apartment of M. de Mazarin, a scene of another sort was being enacted in those apartments. Mazarin was in bed, suffering a little from the gout, but as he was a man of order, who utilized even pain, he forced his wakefulness to be the humble servant of his labor. He had consequently ordered Bernouin, his valet de chambre, to bring him a little traveling desk, so that he might write in bed. But the gout is not an adversary that allows itself to be conquered so easily. Therefore, at each movement he made, the pain from dull became sharp. Is Brienne there? Asked he of Bernouin. No, Monseigneur, replied the valet de chamber. M. de Brienne, with your permission, is gone to bed. But, if it is the wish of your eminence, he can speedily be called. No, it is not worthwhile. Let us see, however, cursed ciphers. And the cardinal began to think, counting on his fingers the while. Oh, ciphers is it? Said Bernouin. Very well. If your eminence attempts calculations, I will promise you a pretty headache tomorrow. And with that, please to remember M. Ganot is not here. You are right, Bernouin. You must take Brienne's place, my friend. Indeed, I ought to have brought M. Colbert with me. That young man goes on very well. Bernouin, very well. A very orderly youth. I do not know, said the valet de chamber, but I don't like the countenance of your young man who goes on so well. Well, Bernouin, we don't stand in need of your advice. Place yourself there. Take the pen and write. I'm ready, Monseigneur. What am I to write? Hey, that's the place, after the 2 lines already traced. I am they. Write 760,000 livres. That is written. Upon lions. The cardinal appeared to hesitate. Upon lions, repeated Bernouin. 3,900,000 livres. Well, Monseigneur. Upon Bordeaux, 7 millions. 7, repeated Bernouin. Yes, said the cardinal pettishly, 7. Then, recollecting himself, you understand, Bernouin, added he, that all this money is to be spent? Hey, Monseigneur, whether it be to be spent or put away is of very little consequence to me, since none of these millions are mine. These millions are the king's. It is the king's money I am reckoning. Well, what were we saying? You always interrupt me. 7 millions upon Bordeaux. Ah, yes, that's right. Upon Madrid, 4 millions. I give you to understand plainly to whom this money belongs. Bernouin. Seeing that everybody has the stupidity to believe me rich in millions, I repel the silly idea. A minister, besides, has nothing of his own. Come, go on. Rentries generalis, 7 millions. Properties, 9 millions. Have you written that, Bernouin? Yes, Monseigneur. Boys, 600,000 livres. Various property, 2 millions. Ah, I forgot the furniture of the different chateaux. Must I put the crown? Asked Bernouin. No, it is of no use doing that. That is understood. Have you written that, Bernouin? Yes, Monseigneur. And the ciphers? Stand straight under one another. Cast them up, Bernouin. 39,260,000 livres, Monseigneur. Ow! Cried the cardinal, in a tone of vexation. They are not yet 40 millions. Bernouin recommenced the addition. No, Monseigneur, they want 740,000 livres. Mazarin asked for the account and revised it carefully. Yes, but, said Bernouin, 39,260,000 livres made good round sum. Ah, Bernouin, I wish the king had it. Your eminence told me that this money was his majesty's. Doubtless, as clear, as transparent as possible. These 39 millions are bespoken and much more. Bernouin smiled after his own fashion. That is, like a man who believes no more than he is willing to believe, whilst preparing the cardinal's night draught and putting his pillow to rights. Oh, said Mazarin, when the valet had gone out. Not yet 40 millions. I must, however, attain that sum which I had set down for myself. But who knows whether I shall at time? I sink, I'm going, I shall never reach it. And yet, who knows that I may not find 2 or 3 millions in the pockets of my good friends the Spaniards? They discovered Peru, those people did, and, what the devil, they must have something left. As he was speaking thus, entirely occupied with his ciphers, and thinking no more his gout, repelled by a preoccupation which, with the cardinal, was the most powerful of all preoccupations, Bernouin rushed into the chamber, quite in a fright. "Well," asked the cardinal, "what is the matter now?" "The king, Monseigneur, the king." "How?" "The king," said Mazarin, quickly concealing his paper. "The king here. The king at this hour. I thought he was in bed long ago. What is the matter, then?" The king could hear these last words, and see the terrified gesture of the cardinal rising up in his bed, for he entered the chamber at that moment. "It is nothing, Monsieur le Cardinal, or at least nothing which can alarm you. It is an important communication which I wish to make to your eminence tonight. That is all." Mazarin immediately thought of that marked attention which the king had given to his words concerning Mademoiselle de Mancini, and the communication appeared to him probably to refer to this source. He recovered his serenity then instantly, and assumed his most agreeable a change of countenance which inspired the king with the greatest joy. And when Louis was seated, "Sire," said the cardinal, "I ought certainly to listen to your majesty standing, but the violence of my complaint—" "No ceremony between us, my dear Monsieur le Cardinal," said Louis kindly. "I am your pupil, and not the king, you know very well, and this evening in particular, as I come to you as a petitioner, as a solicitor, and one very humble, and desirous to be kindly received, too." Mazarin, seeing the heightened color of the king, was confirmed in his first idea, that is to say, that love thoughts were hidden under all these fine words. This time, political cunning, keen as it was, made a mistake. This color was not caused by the bashfulness of a juvenile passion, but only by the painful contraction of the royal pride. Like a good uncle, Mazarin felt disposed to facilitate the confidence. "Speak, sire," said he, "and since your majesty is willing for an instant to forget that I am your subject, and call me your master and instructor, I promise your majesty my most devoted and tender consideration." "Thanks, Monsieur le Cardinal," answered the king, "that which I have to ask of your eminence has but little to do with myself." "So much the worse," replied the cardinal, "so much the worse. Sire, I should wish your majesty to ask of me something of importance, even a sacrifice. But whatever it may be that you ask me, I am ready to set your heart at rest by granting it, my dear sire." "Well, this is what brings me here," said the king, with a beating of the heart that had no equal except the beating of the heart of the minister. "I have just received a visit from my brother, the King of England." Mazarin bounded in his bed as if he had been put in relation with a Leyden jar or voltaic pile. At the same time, the surprise, or rather manifest disappointment, inflamed his features with such a blaze of anger that Louis XIV, little diplomatist as he was, so that the minister had hoped to hear something else. "Charles II?" exclaimed Mazarin, with a hoarse voice and a disdainful movement of his lips. "You have received a visit from Charles II?" "From King Charles II," replied Louis, according in a marked manner to the grandson of Henry IV, the title which Mazarin had forgotten to give him. "Yes, Monsieur le Cardinal, that unhappy prince has touched my heart with a relation of his misfortunes. His distress is great, Monsieur le Cardinal, and it has appeared painful to me, who have seen my own throne disputed, who have been forced in times of commotion to quit my capital, to me, in short, who am acquainted with misfortune, to leave a deposed and fugitive brother without assistance." "Eh?" said the cardinal, sharply. Why had he not, as you have, a Jules Mazarin by his side? His crown would then have remained intact. "I know all that my house owes to your eminence," replied the king haughtily, "and you may believe well that I, on my part, shall never forget it. It is precisely because my brother, the King of England, has not about him the powerful genius who has saved me. It is for that, I say, that I wish to conciliate the aid of that same genius, and beg you to extend your arm over his head, well assured, Monsieur le Cardinal, that your hand, by touching him only, would know how to replace upon his brow the crown which fell at the foot of his father's scaffold." "Sire," replied Mazarin, "I thank you for your good opinion with regard to myself, but we have nothing to do yonder. They are a set of madmen who deny God and cut off the heads of their kings." They are dangerous. Observe, sire, and filthy to the touch after having wallowed in royal blood and covenantal murder. That policy has never suited me. I scorn it and reject it. Therefore you ought to assist in establishing a better. What is that? The restoration of Charles II, for example. Good heavens, cried Mazarin. Does the poor prince flatter himself with that chimera? Yes, he does, replied the young king, terrified of the difficulties opposed to this project, which he fancied he could perceive in the infallible eye of his minister. He only asks for 1,000,000 to carry out his purpose. Is that all? A little million, if you please, said the cardinal, ironically, with an effort to conquer his Italian accent. A little million, if you please. Brother, bow. A family of mendicants. Cardinal, said Louis, raising his head, that family of mendicants is a branch of my family. Are you rich enough to give millions to other people? Sire, have you millions to throw away? Oh, replied Louis XIV, with great pain, which he, however, by a strong effort, prevented from appearing on his countenance. Oh, yes, Monsieur le Cardinal, I am well aware I am poor, and yet the crown of France is worth 1,000,000, and to perform a good action I would pledge my crown if it were necessary. I could find Jews who would be willing to lend me 1,000,000. So, sire, you say you want 1,000,000, said Mazarin. Yes, monsieur, I say so. You are mistaken, greatly mistaken. Sire, you want much more than that. But Nguyen, you shall see, sire, how much you really want. What, cardinal, said the king, are you going to consult a lackey about my affairs? Bon Nguyen, cried the cardinal again, without appearing to remark the humiliation of the young prince. Come here, Benuin, and tell me the figures I gave you just now. Cardinal, cardinal, did you not hear me? Said Louis, turning pale with anger. Do not be angry. Sire, I deal openly with the affairs of your majesty. Everyone in France knows that. My books are as open as day. What did I tell you to do just now, Benuin? Your eminence commanded me to cast up an account. You did it, did you not? Yes, my lord. To verify the amount of which his majesty, at this moment, stands in need. Did I not tell you so? Be frank, my friend. Your eminence said so. Well, what sum did I say I wanted? 45 millions, I think. And what sum could we find, after collecting all our resources? 39,260,000. That is correct, but Nguyen, that is all I wanted to know. Leave us now, said the cardinal, fixing his brilliant eye upon the young king, who sat mute with stupefaction. However, stammered the king. What, do you still doubt, sire? Said the cardinal. Well, here's a proof of what I said. And Mazarin drew from under his bolster the paper covered with figures, which he presented to the king, who turned away his eyes. His vexation was so deep. Therefore, as it is 1,000,000 you want, sire, and that 1,000,000 is not set down here, it is 46 millions your majesty stands in need of. Well, I don't think that any Jews in the world would lend such a sum even upon the crown of France. The king, clenching his hands beneath his ruffles, pushed away his chair. So it must be then, said he, my brother the King of England will die of hunger. Sire, replied Mazarin, in the same tone, remember this proverb, which I give you as the expression of the soundest policy. Rejoice at being poor when your neighbor is poor likewise. Louis meditated for a few moments, with an inquisitive glance directed to the paper, one end of which remained under the bolster. Then, said he, it is impossible to comply with my demand for money, my lord cardinal, is it? Absolutely, sire. Remember, this will secure me a future enemy if he succeed in recovering his crown without my assistance. If your majesty only fears that you may be quite at ease, replied Mazarin, eagerly. Very well, I say no more about it, exclaimed Louis XIV. Have I at least convinced you, sire, placing his hand upon that of the young king? Perfectly. If there be anything else, Ask it. Sire, I shall be most happy to grant it to you, having refused this. Anything else, my lord? Why, yes. Am I not devoted body and soul to your majesty? Ola, Bernuin, lights and guard for his majesty. His majesty is returning to his own chamber. Not yet, monsieur. Since you place your goodwill at my disposal, I will take advantage of it. For yourself, sire, asked the cardinal, hoping that his niece was at length about to be named. No, monsieur, not for myself, replied Louis, but still for my brother Charles. The brow of Mazarin again became clouded, and he grumbled a few words that the king could not catch. Chapter 11. Mazarin's policy. Instead of the hesitation with which he had accosted the cardinal a quarter of an hour before, there might be read in the eyes of the young king that will against which a struggle might be maintained, and which might be crushed by its own impotence, but which, at least, would preserve, like a wound in the depth of the heart, the remembrance of its defeat. This time, my lord cardinal, we have to deal with something more easily found than 1,000,000. Do you think so, sire? Said Mazarin, looking at the king with that penetrating eye which was accustomed to read to the bottom of hearts. Yes, I think so, and when you know the object of my request. And do you think I do not know it, sire? You know what remains for me to say to you. Listen, sire, these are King Charles's own words. Oh, impossible! Listen, and if that miserly, beggarly Italian said he, my lord cardinal, that is the sense, if not the words. Hey, good heavens! I wish him no ill on that account. One is biased by his passions. He said to you, if that vile Italian refuses the 1,000,000 we ask of him, sire, if we are forced, for want of money, to renounce diplomacy, well, then we will ask him to grant us 500 gentlemen. The king started, for the cardinal was only mistaken in the number. Is not that it, sire? Cried the minister with a triumphant accent. And then he added some fine words. He said, I have friends on the other side of the channel, and these friends only want a leader and a banner. When they see me, when they behold the banner of France, they will rally round me, for they will comprehend that I have your support. The colors of the French uniform will be worth as much to me as the millionaire de Mazarin refuses us, for he was pretty well assured I should refuse him that 1,000,000 dot. I shall conquer with these 500 gentlemen, sire, and all the honor will be yours. Now, that is what he said, or to that purpose, was it not? Turning those plain words into brilliant metaphors and pompous images, for they are fine talkers in that family. The father talked even on the scaffold. The perspiration of shame stood upon the brow of Louis. He felt that it was inconsistent with his dignity to hear his brother thus insulted, but he did not yet know how to act with him to whom every one yielded, even his mother. At last he made an effort. But, said he, my lord cardinal, it is not 500 men, it is only 200. Well, but you see I guess what he wanted. I never denied that you had a penetrating eye, and that was why I thought you would not refuse my brother Charles a thing so simple and so easy to grant him as what I ask of you in his name, my lord cardinal, or rather in my own. Sire, said Mazarin, I have studied policy 30 years, first under the auspices of Anna Cardinal de Richelieu, and then alone. This policy has not always been over-honest. It must be allowed, but it has never been unskillful. Now that which is proposed to your majesty is dishonest and unskillful at the same time. Dishonest, monsieur. Sire, you entered into a treaty with Cromwell. Yes, and in that very treaty Cromwell signed his name above mine. Why did you sign yours so low down, sire? Cromwell found a good place, and he took it. That was his custom. I return, then, to M. Cromwell. You have a treaty with him, that is to say, with England, since when you signed that treaty M. Cromwell was England. M. Cromwell is dead. Do you think so, sire? No doubt he is, since his son Richard has succeeded him and has abdicated. Yes, that is it exactly. Richard inherited after the death of his father, and England at the abdication of Richard. The treaty formed part of the inheritance. whether in the hands of M. Richard or in the hands of England. The treaty is, then, still as good, as valid as ever. Why should you evade it? Sire, what has changed? Charles wants today what we were not willing to grant him 10 years ago, but that was foreseen and provided against. You are the ally of England, sire, and not of Charles II. It was doubtless wrong, from a family point of view, to sign a treaty with a man who had cut off the head of the king your father's brother-in-law, and to contract an alliance with a parliament which they call yonder the Rump Parliament. It was unbecoming, I acknowledge, but it was not unskillful from a political point of view, since, thanks to that treaty, I save your majesty, then a minor, the trouble and danger of a foreign war, which the Fronde, you remember the Fronde, sire. The young king hung his head, which the Fronde might have fatally complicated, and thus I prove to your majesty that to change our plan now, without warning our allies, would be at once unskillful and dishonest. We should make war with the aggression on our side. We should make it, deserving to have it made against us, and we should have the appearance of fearing it whilst provoking it, for a permission granted to 500 men, to 200 men, to 50 men, to 10 men, is still a permission. One Frenchman, that is the nation, one uniform, that is the army. Suppose, sire, for example, that sooner or later you should have war with Holland, which sooner or later will certainly happen, or with Spain, which will perhaps ensue if your marriage fails. Mazarin stole a furtive glance at the king, and there are 1,000 causes that might yet make your marriage fail. Well, would you approve of England sending to the United Provinces or to Spain a regiment, a company, a squadron even, of English gentlemen? Would you think that they kept within the limits of their treaty of alliance? Louis listened. It seemed so strange to him that Mazarin should invoke good faith, and he the author of so many political tricks, called Mazarinades. And yet, said the king, without any manifest authorization, I cannot prevent gentlemen of my states from passing over into England if such should be their good pleasure. You should compel them to return, sire, or at least protest against their presence as enemies in an allied country. But come, my lord cardinal, you are so profound a genius. Try if you cannot find means to assist this poor king without compromising ourselves. And that is exactly what I am not willing to do, my dear sire, said Mazarin. If England were to act exactly according to my wishes, she could not act better than she does. If I directed the policy of England from this place, I should not direct it otherwise. Governed as she is governed, England is an eternal nest of contention for all Europe. Holland protects Charles II. Let Holland do so. They will quarrel, they will fight. They are the only two maritime powers. Let them destroy each other's navies. We can construct ours with the wrecks of their vessels, when we shall save our money to buy nails. Oh, how paltry and mean is all this that you are telling me, Monsieur le Cardinal. Yes, but nevertheless it is true. Sire, you must confess that, still further, suppose I admit, for a moment, the possibility of breaking your word and evading the treaty. Such a thing sometimes happens, but that is when some great interest is to be promoted by it, or when the treaty is found to be too troublesome. Well, you will authorize the engagement asked of you. France, her banner, which is the same thing, will cross the straits and will fight. France will be conquered. Why so? Ma foi, we have a pretty general to fight under this Charles II. Worcester gave us good proofs of that. But he will no longer have to deal with Cromwell, monsieur. But he will have to deal with Monk, who is quite as dangerous. The brave brewer of whom we are speaking was a visionary. He had moments of exaltation, of inflation, during which he ran over like an overfilled cask, and from the chinks there always escaped some drops of his thoughts, and by the sample the whole his thought was to be made out. Cromwell has thus allowed us more than 10 times to penetrate into his very soul, when one would have conceived that soul to be enveloped in triple brass, as Horace has it. But Monk, oh, sire, God defend you from ever having anything to transact politically with Monk. It is he who has given me, in 1 year, all the grey hairs I have. Monk is no fanatic. Unfortunately, he is a politician. He does not overflow. He keeps close together. For 10 years he has had his eyes fixed upon one object, and nobody has yet been able to ascertain what. Every morning, as Louis XI advised, he burns his nightcap. Therefore, on the day when this plan slowly and solitarily ripened shall break forth, it will break forth with all the conditions of success which always accompany an unforeseen event. That is, Monk, sire, of whom perhaps you have never heard, of whom, perhaps, you did not even know the name before your brother Charles II, who knows what he is, pronounce it before you. He is a marvel of depth and tenacity, the two only things against which intelligence and ardor are blunted. Sire, I had ardor when I was young. I always was intelligent. I may safely boast of it, because I am reproached with it. I have done very well with these two qualities, since, from the son of a fisherman of Piscina, I have become prime minister to the King of France. And in that position your majesty will perhaps acknowledge I have rendered some service to the throne of your majesty. Well, sire, if I had met with Monk on my way, instead of Monsieur de Beaufort, Monsieur de Retz, or Monsieur le Prince, well, we should have been ruined. If you engage yourself rashly, sire, you will fall into the talons of this politic soldier. The cask of Monk, sire, is an iron coffer, in the recesses of which he shuts up his thoughts, and no one has a key of it. Therefore, near him, or rather before him, I bow, sire, for I have nothing but a velvet cap. What do you think Monk wishes to do? Then, hey, sire, if I knew that, I would not tell you to mistrust him, for I should be stronger than he. But with him, I am afraid to guess. To guess? You understand my word, for if I thought I had guessed, I should stop at an idea, and, in spite of myself, should pursue that idea. Since that man has been in power yonder, I am like one of the damned in Dante whose neck Satan has twisted, and who walk forward looking behind them. I am traveling towards Madrid, but I never lose sight of London. To guess, with that devil of a man, is to deceive oneself, and to deceive oneself is to ruin oneself. God keep me from ever seeking to guess what he aims at. I confine myself to watching what he does, and that is well enough. Now I believe. You observe the meaning of the word I believe. I believe, with respect to Monk, ties one to nothing. I believe that he has a strong inclination to succeed Cromwell. Your Charles II has already caused proposals to be made to him by 10 persons. He has satisfied himself with driving these 10 meddlers from his presence, without saying anything to them but, "Begone, or I will have you hung." That man is a sepulchre. At this moment Monk is affecting devotion to the Rump Parliament. Of his devotion, observe, I am not the dupe. Monk has no wish to be assassinated. An assassination would stop him in the midst of his operations, and his work must be accomplished. So I believe, but do not believe, what I believe, sire, for I say I believe from habit. I believe that Monk is keeping on friendly terms with the Parliament till the day comes for dispersing it. You are asked for swords, but they are to fight against Monk. God preserve you from fighting against Monk, sire, for Monk would beat us, and I should never console myself after being beaten by Monk. I should say to myself, Monk has foreseen that victory 10 years. For God's sake, sire, out of friendship for you, if not out of consideration for himself, let Charles II keep quiet. Your majesty will give him a little income here. Give him one of your chateaux. Yes, wait a while. But I forgot the treaty, that famous treaty of which we were just now speaking. Your majesty has not even the right to give him a chateau. How is that? Yes. Your majesty is bound not to grant hospitality to King Charles, and to compel him to leave France even. It was on this account we forced him to quit you, and yet here he is again. Sire, I hope you will give your brother to understand that he cannot remain with us, that it is impossible he should be allowed to compromise us, or I myself. Enough, my lord, said Louis XIV, rising. In refusing me 1,000,000, perhaps you may be right. Your millions are your own. In refusing me 200 gentlemen, you are still further in the right. For you are prime minister, and you have, in the eyes of France, the responsibility of peace and war. But that you should pretend to prevent me, who am king, from extending my hospitality to the grandson of Henry IV, to my cousin German, to the companion of my childhood, There your power stops, and there begins my will." "Sire," said Mazarin, delighted at being let off so cheaply, and who had, besides, only fought so earnestly to arrive at that. "Sire, I shall always bend before the will of my king. Let my king, then, keep near him, or in one of his chateaux, the King of England. Let Mazarin know it, but let not the minister know it." "Good night, my lord," said Louis XIV. "I go away in despair." "But convinced, and that is all I desire, sire," replied Mazarin. The king made no answer, and retired quite pensive, convinced, not of all Mazarin had told him, but of one thing which he took care not to mention to him, and that was, that it was necessary for him to study seriously both his own affairs and those of Europe, for he found them very difficult and very obscure. Louis found the King of England seated in the same place where he had left him. On perceiving him, the English prince arose, but at the first glance he saw discouragement written in dark letters upon his cousin's brow. Then, speaking first, as if to facilitate the painful avowal that Louis had to make to him, "Whatever it may be," said he, "I shall never forget all the kindness, all the friendship you have exhibited towards me." "Alas," replied Louis, in a melancholy tone, "only barren goodwill, my brother." Charles II became extremely pale. He passed his cold hand over his brow and struggled for a few instants against a faintness that made him tremble. "I understand," said he at last. "No more hope." Louis seized the hand of Charles II. "Wait, my brother," said he. "Precipitate nothing. Everything may change. Hasty resolutions ruin all causes. Add another year of trial, I implore you, to the years you have already undergone. You have, to induce you to act now rather than at another time, neither occasion nor opportunity. Come with me, my brother. I will give you one of my residences, whichever you prefer, to inhabit. I, with you, will keep my eyes upon events. We will prepare. Come, then, my brother, have courage." Charles II withdrew his hand from that of the king, and drawing back, to salute him with more ceremony, "With all my heart, thanks," replied he. "Sire, but I have prayed without success to the greatest king on earth. Now I will go and ask a miracle of God." And he went out without being willing to hear any more, his head carried loftily, his hand trembling, with a painful contraction of his noble countenance, and a profound gloom which, finding no more hope in the world of men, appeared to go beyond it and ask it in worlds unknown. The officer of musketeers, on seeing him pass by thus pale, bowed almost to his knees as he saluted him. He then took a flambeau, called 2 musketeers, and descended the deserted staircase with the unfortunate king, holding in his left hand his hat, the plume of which swept the steps. Arrived at the door, the musketeer asked the king which way he was going, that he might direct the musketeers. "Monsieur," replied Charles II, in a subdued voice, "you have known my father. Say, did you ever pray for him? If you have done so, do not forget me in your prayers. Now, I am going alone, and beg of you not to accompany me or have me accompanied any further." The officer bowed and sent away the musketeers into the interior of the palace. But he himself remained an instant under the porch watching the departing Charles II, till he was lost in the turn of the next street. To him as to his father formerly, murmured he, "Athos, if he were here, would say with reason, 'Salute full and majesty.'" Then, reascending the staircase, "Oh, the vile service that I follow," said he at every step. "Oh, my pitiful master! Life thus carried on is no longer tolerable, and it is at length time that I should do something. No more generosity, no more energy. The master has succeeded. The pupil is starved forever. More to you, I will not resist. Come, you men," continued he, entering the antechamber. "Why are you all looking at me so? Extinguish these torches and return to your posts. Ah, you were guarding me? Yes, you watch over me, do you not, worthy fellows? Brave fools. I am not the doctor guys. Begone, they will not assassinate me in the little passage. Besides," added he, in a low voice, That would be a resolution, and no resolutions have been formed since Monsieur le Cardinal de Richelieu died. Now, with all his faults, that was a man. It is settled. Tomorrow I will throw my cassock to the nettles. Then, reflecting, "No," said he, "not yet. I have one great trial to make, and I will make it. But that, and I swear it, shall be the last, more to you." He had not finished speaking when a voice issued from the king's chamber. "Monsieur le Lieutenant," said this voice. "Here am I," replied he. "The king desires to speak to you." "Humph," said the lieutenant. "Perhaps of what I was thinking about." And he went into the king's apartment. Chapter 12. The King and the Lieutenant. As soon as the king saw the officer enter, he dismissed his valet de chamber and his gentleman. "Who is on duty tomorrow, monsieur?" asked he. The lieutenant bowed his head with military politeness and replied, "I am, sire." "What? Still you?" "Always I, sire." "How can that be, monsieur?" "Sire, when traveling, the musketeers apply all the posts of your majesty's household. That is to say, yours, her majesty the queen's, and monsieur le cardinal's, the latter of whom borrows of the king the best part, or rather the most numerous part, of the royal guard. But in the interims, there are no interims, sire, but for 20 or 30 men who rest out of 120. At the Louvre it is very different, and if I were at the Louvre I should rely upon my brigadier. But when traveling, sire, no one knows what may happen, and I prefer doing my duty myself." "Then you are on guard every day?" "And every night." "Yes, sire." "Monsieur, I cannot allow that. I will have you rest." "That is very kind, sire, but I will not." "What do you say?" said the king, who did not at first comprehend the full meaning of this reply. "I say, sire, that I will not expose myself to the chance of a fault. If the devil had a trick to play on me, you understand, sire, as he knows the man with whom he has to deal, he would choose a moment when I should not be there. My duty and the peace of my conscience before everything, sire. But such duty will kill you, monsieur. Eh, sire, I have performed it for 30 years, and in all France and Navarre there is not a man in better health than I am. Moreover, I entreat you, sire, not to trouble yourself about me. That would appear very strange to me, seeing that I am not accustomed to it." The king cut short the conversation by a fresh question. "Shall you be here, then, tomorrow morning?" "As at present?" "Yes, sire." The king walked several times up and down his chamber. It was very plain that he burned with a desire to speak, but that he was restrained by some fear or other. The lieutenant, standing motionless, hat in hand, watched him making these evolutions, and, whilst looking at him, grumbled to himself, biting his mustache. "He has not half a crown worth of resolution. Parole d'honneur. I would lay a wager he does not speak at all." The king continued to walk about, casting from time to time a side glance at the lieutenant. "He is the very image of his father," continued the latter, in his secret soliloquy. "He is at once proud, avaricious, and timid. The devil take his master, say I." The king stopped. "Lieutenant," said he, "I am here, sire." "Why did you cry out this evening, down below in the salons, 'The king's service, His Majesty's Musketeers'?" "Because you gave me the order, sire." "I? Yourself?" "Indeed, I did not say a word, monsieur." "Sire, an order is given by a sign, by a gesture, by a glance, as intelligibly, as freely, and as clearly as by word of mouth. A servant who has nothing but ease is not half a good servant. Your eyes are very penetrating. Then, monsieur." "How is that, sire?" "Because they see what is not." "My eyes are good, though, sire, although they have served their master long and much. When they have anything to see, they seldom miss the opportunity. Now, this evening, they saw that your majesty colored with endeavoring to conceal the inclination to yawn, that your majesty looked with eloquent supplications, first at his eminence, and then at her majesty, the queen mother, and at length to the entrance door, and they so thoroughly remarked all I have said that they saw your Majesty's lips articulate these words, "Who will get me out of this?" "Monsieur," or something to this effect, "Sire, my musketeers." I could then no longer hesitate. That look was for me. The order was for me. I cried out instantly, "His Majesty's musketeers." And, besides, that was shown to be true, sire, not only by your Majesty's not saying I was wrong, but proving I was right by going out at once. The king turned away to smile. Then, after a few seconds, he again fixed his limpid eye upon that countenance, so intelligent, so bold, and so firm, that it might have been said to be the proud and energetic profile of the eagle facing the sun. "That is all very well," said he, after a short silence, during which he endeavored, in vain, to make his officer lower his eyes. But seeing the king said no more, the latter pirouetted on his heels, and took 3 steps towards the door, muttering, "He will not speak. Mordieu, he will not speak." "Thank you, monsieur," said the king at last. Continued the lieutenant, "there was only wanting that. Blame for having been less of a fool than another might have been." And he went to the door, allowing his spurs to jingle in true military style. But when he was on the threshold, feeling that the king's desire drew him back, he returned. "Has your Majesty told me all?" asked he, in a tone we cannot describe, but which, without appearing to solicit the royal confidence, contained so much persuasive frankness that the king immediately replied, "Yes, but draw near, monsieur." "Now then," murmured the officer, "he is coming to it at last. Listen to me. I shall not lose a word, sire. You will mount on horseback tomorrow at about 4:30 in the morning, and you will have a horse saddled for me. From your Majesty's stables. No, one of your musketeers' horses. Very well, sire. Is that all? And you will accompany me. Alone. Alone. Shall I come to seek your Majesty, or shall I wait? You will wait for me. Where, sire? At the little park gate." The lieutenant bowed, understanding that the king had told him all he had to say. In fact, the king dismissed him with a gracious wave of the hand. The officer left the chamber of the king, and returned to place himself philosophically in his fauteuil, where, far from sleeping, as might have been expected, considering how late it was, he began to reflect more deeply than he had ever reflected before. The result of these reflections was not so melancholy as the preceding ones had been. "Come, he has begun," said he. "Love urges him on, and he goes forward. He goes forward. The king is nobody in his own palace, but the man perhaps may prove to be worth something. Well, we shall see tomorrow morning." "Oh, oh!" cried he, all at once starting up. "That is a gigantic idea, mordieu, and perhaps my fortune depends, at least, upon that idea." After this exclamation, the officer arose and marched, with his hands in the pockets of his justicopes, about the immense antechamber that served him as an apartment. The wax light flamed furiously under the effects of a fresh breeze which stole in through the chinks of the door and the window, and cut the cell diagonally. It threw out a reddish, unequal light, sometimes brilliant, sometimes dull, and the tall shadow of the lieutenant was seen marching on the wall, in profile, like a figure by Callot, with his long sword and feathered hat. "Certainly," said he, "I am mistaken if Mazarin is not laying a snare for this amorous boy." Mazarin, this evening, gave an address, and made an appointment as complacently as M. Dango himself could have done. I heard him, and I know the meaning of his words. "Tomorrow morning," said he, "they will pass opposite the bridge of Bois. Mordieu, that is clear enough, and particularly for a lover. That is the cause of this embarrassment. That is the cause of this hesitation. That is the cause of this order. Monsieur the lieutenant of my musketeers, be on horseback tomorrow at 4:00 in the morning." Which is as clear as if he had said, "Monsieur the lieutenant of my musketeers, tomorrow at 4 at the bridge of Bois. Do you understand? Here is a state secret, then, which I, humble as I am, have in my possession, while it is in action. And how do I get it? Because I have good eyes, as His Majesty just now said. They say he loves this little Italian doll furiously. They say he threw himself at his mother's feet to beg her to allow him to marry her. They say the Queen went so far as to consult the court of Rome whether such a marriage, contracted against her will, would be valid. Oh, if I were but 25. If I had by my side those I no longer have. If I did not despise the whole world most profoundly, I would embroil Mazarin with the Queen Mother, France with Spain, and I would make a queen after my own fashion. But let that pass. And the lieutenant snapped his fingers in disdain. This miserable Italian, this poor creature, this sordid wretch, who has just refused the King of England 1,000,000, would not perhaps give me 1,000 pistoles for the news I could carry him. Mordieu, I am falling into second childhood. I am becoming stupid indeed. The idea of Mazarin giving anything. Ha! Ha! How? And he laughed in a subdued voice. Well, let us go to sleep. Let us go to sleep. And the sooner the better. My mind is wearied with my evening's work, and will see things tomorrow more clearly than today. And upon this recommendation, made to himself, he folded his cloak around him, looking with contempt upon his royal neighbor. 5 minutes after this he was asleep, with his hands clenched and his lips apart, giving escape, not to his secret, but to a sonorous sound, which rose and spread freely beneath the majestic roof of the antechamber. Chapter 13. Mary de Mancini. The sun had scarcely shed its first beams on the majestic trees of the park and the lofty turrets of the castle, when the young king, who had been awake more than 2 hours, possessed by the sleeplessness of love, opened his shutters himself, and cast an inquiring look into the courts of the sleeping palace. He saw that it was the hour agreed upon. The great court clock pointed to 4:15. He did not disturb his valet de chambre, who was sleeping soundly at some distance. He dressed himself, and the valet, in a great fright, sprang up, thinking he had been deficient in his duty. But the king sent him back again, commanding him to preserve the most absolute silence. He then descended the little staircase, went out at a lateral door, and perceived at the end of the wall a mounted horseman holding another horse by the bridle. This horseman could not be recognized in his cloak and slouched hat. As to the horse, settled like that of a rich citizen, it offered nothing remarkable to the most experienced eye. Louis took the bridle. The officer held the stirrup without dismounting, and asked His Majesty's orders in a low voice. "Follow me," replied the king. The officer put his horse to the trot, behind that of his master, and they descended the hill towards the bridge. When they reached the other side of the Loire, "Monsieur," said the king, "you will please to ride until you see a carriage coming. Then return and inform me. I will wait here. Will your Majesty deign to give me some description of the carriage I am charged to discover? A carriage in which you will see 2 ladies, and probably their attendants likewise." "Sire, I should not wish to make a mistake. Is there no other sign by which I may know this carriage?" "It will bear, in all probability, the arms of Monsieur le Cardinal." "That is sufficient, sire," replied the officer, fully instructed in the object of his search. He put his horse to the trot, and rode sharply on in the direction pointed out by the king. But he had scarcely gone 500 paces when he saw 4 mules, and then a carriage, loom up from behind a little hill. Behind this carriage came another. It required only one glance to assure him that these were the equipages he was in search of. He therefore turned his bridle, and rode back to the king. "Sire," said he, "here are the carriages. The first, as you said, contains 2 ladies with their femme de chambre. The second contains the footmen, provisions, and necessaries." "That is well," replied the king in an agitated voice. "Please to go and tell those ladies that a cavalier of the court wishes to pay his respects to them alone." The officer set off at a gallop. "Mordieu," said he, as he rode on, "here is a new and an honorable employment. I hope. I complained of being nobody. I am the king's confidant. That is enough to make a musketeer burst with pride." He approached the carriage, and delivered his message gallantly and intelligently. There were 2 ladies in the carriage, one of great beauty, although rather thin, the other less favored by nature, but lively, graceful, and uniting in the delicate lines of a brow all the signs of a strong will. Her eyes, animated and piercing in particular, spoke more eloquently than all the amorous phrases in fashion in those days of gallantry. It was to her D'Artagnan address himself, without fear of being mistaken, although the other was, as we have said, the more handsome of the two. "Madam," said he, "I am the lieutenant of the Musketeers, and there is on the road a horseman who awaits you, and is desirous of paying his respects to you." At these words, the effect of which he watched closely, the lady with the black eyes uttered a cry of joy, leaned out of the carriage window, and seeing the cavalier approaching, held out her arms, exclaiming, "Ah, my dear sire," and the tears gushed from her eyes. The coachman stopped his team. The women rose in confusion from the back of the carriage, and the second lady made a slight curtsy, terminated by the most ironical smile that jealousy ever imparted to the lips of woman. "Marie, dear Marie," cried the king, taking the hand of the black-eyed lady in both his, and opening the heavy door himself. He drew her out of the carriage with so much ardor that she was in his arms before she touched the ground. The lieutenant, posted on the other side of the carriage, saw and heard all without being observed. The king offered his arm to Mademoiselle de Mancini, and made a sign to the coachman and lackeys to proceed. It was nearly 6 o'clock. The road was fresh and pleasant. Tall trees with their foliage still enclosed, and the golden down of their buds let the dew of morning filter from their trembling branches like liquid diamonds. The grass was bursting at the foot of the hedges. The swallows, having returned since only a few days, described their graceful curves between the heavens and the water. A breeze, laden with the perfumes of the blossoming woods, sighed along the road, and wrinkled the surface of the waters of the river. All these beauties of the day, all these perfumes of the plants, all these aspirations of the earth towards heaven, intoxicated the two lovers, walking side by side, leaning upon each other, eyes fixed upon eyes, hand clasping hand, and who, lingering as by a common desire, did not dare to speak, they had so much to say. The king offered his arm to Mademoiselle de Mancini, and made a sign to the coachman and lackeys to proceed. The officer saw the king's horse, in wandering this way and that, annoyed Mademoiselle de Mancini. He took advantage of the pretext of securing the horse to draw near them, and dismounting, walked between the two horses he led. He did not lose a single word or gesture of the lovers. It was Mademoiselle de Mancini who at length began. "Ah, my dear sire," said she, "you do not abandon me, then?" "No, Marie," replied the king, "you see I do not. I had so often been told, though, that as soon as we should be separated you would no longer think of me. Dear Marie, is it then today only that you have discovered we are surrounded by people interested in deceiving us? But, then, sire, this journey, this alliance with Spain, they are going to marry you off." Louis hung his head. At the same time the officer could see the eyes of Marie de Mancini shine in the sun with the brilliancy of a dagger starting from its sheath. "And you have done nothing in favor of our love?" asked the girl, after a silence of a moment. "Ah, mademoiselle, how could you believe that? I threw myself at the feet of my mother. I begged her, I implored her, I told her all my hopes of happiness were in you. I even threatened." "Well?" asked Marie, eagerly. "Well?" "The Queen Mother wrote to the court of Rome, and received as answer that a marriage between us would have no validity, and will be dissolved by the Holy Father. At length, finding there was no hope for us, I requested to have my marriage with the Infanta at least delayed. And yet that does not prevent you being on the road to meet her. How can I help it? To my prayers, to my supplications, to my tears, I receive no answer but reasons of state. Well, 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 what is to be done, mademoiselle, when so many wills are leagued against me?" It was now Marie's turn to hang her head. "Then I must bid you adieu forever," said she. "You know that I am being exiled. You know that I am going to be buried alive. You know still more that they want to marry me off, too." Louis became very pale, and placed his hand upon his heart. "If I had thought that my life only had been at stake, I have been so persecuted that I might have yielded. But I thought yours was concerned, my dear sire, and I stood out for the sake of preserving your happiness." "Oh, yes, my happiness, my treasure, murmured the king, more gallantly than passionately, perhaps. The cardinal might have yielded, said Marie, if you had addressed yourself to him, if you had pressed him. For the cardinal to call the king of France his nephew, do you not perceive, sire? He would have made war even for that honor. The cardinal, assured of governing alone, under the double pretext of having brought up the king and given his niece to him in marriage, the cardinal would have fought all antagonists, overcome all obstacles. Oh, sire, I can answer for that. I am a woman, and I see clearly into everything where love is concerned. These words produced a strange effect upon the king. Instead of heightening his passion, they cooled it. He stopped and said hastily, "What is to be said, mademoiselle? Everything has failed. Accept your will, I trust, my dear sire." "Alas," said the king, coloring, "have I a will?" "Oh," said Mademoiselle de Mancini mournfully, wounded by that expression. "The king has no will but that which policy dictates, but that which reasons of state impose upon him." "Oh, it is because you have no love," cried Mary. "If you loved, sire, you would have a will." On pronouncing these words, Mary raised her eyes to her lover, whom she saw more pale and more cast down than an exile who is about to quit his native land forever. "Accuse me," murmured the king, "but do not say I do not love you." A long silence followed these words, which the young king had pronounced with a perfectly true and profound feeling. "I am unable to think that tomorrow, and after tomorrow, I shall see you no more. I cannot think that I am going to end my sad days at a distance from Paris, that the lips of an old man, of an unknown, should touch that hand which you hold within yours. No, in truth, I cannot think of all that, my dear sire, without having my poor heart burst with despair." And Marie de Mancini did shed floods of tears. On his part, the king, much affected, carried his handkerchief to his mouth and stifled a sob. "See," said she, "the carriages have stopped. My sister waits for me. The time has come. What you are about to decide upon will be decided for life." "Oh, sire, you are willing, then, that I should lose you? You are willing, then, Louis, that she to whom you have said I love you should belong to another than to her king, to a master, to a lover? Oh, courage, Louis, courage. One word, a single word. Say I will, and all my life is enchained to yours, and all my heart is yours forever." The king made no reply. Mary then looked at him as Dido looked at Aeneas in the Elysian fields, fierce and disdainful. "Farewell, then," said she. "Farewell, life, love, heaven." And she took a step away. The king detained her, seized her hand, which he pressed to his lips, and despair prevailing over the resolution he appeared to have inwardly formed, he let fall upon that beautiful hand a burning tear of regret, which made Mary start. So really had that tear burned her. She saw the humid eyes of the king, his pale brow, his convulsed lips, and cried, with an accent that cannot be described, "Oh, sire, you are a king, you weep, and yet I depart." As his sole reply, the king hid his face in his handkerchief. The officer uttered something so like a roar that it frightened the horses. Mademoiselle de Mancini, quite indignant, quitted the king's arm, hastily entered the carriage, crying to the coachman, go on, and quick." The coachman obeyed, flogged his mules, and the heavy carriage rocked upon its creaking axle, whilst the King of France, alone, cast down, annihilated, did not dare to look either behind or before him,